Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 41. A few days faster than Xingji estimated, the injury on Shen Li had healed almost, but the poison in the body had not been completely eliminated. Xingji wanted to let her stay in the human world for a few more days, after the poison was removed, then return to the demonic realm. Shen Li could not accept. She was afraid that Demon King would know what to arrange after the matter. Xingji had to rush back to the demonic realm. They didn't think when they came back to the demonic realm, learned that Rongjun was still in the demonic realm. When he returned to the demonic realm, he began to stick to Mo Fong. He followed Mo Fong and sometimes hindered the official duties of Mo Fong. Shen Li was particularly angry when he heard it, just wanted to make the flowery guy stupid, so that he could no longer be annoying, and the immortal who stayed in the demonic realm at this time was not only Rongjun. Luo Tian goddess. She was not really a goddess, but the title that the sky world gave her. She was the sister of Rongjun, the granddaughter of the emperor, the woman who liked Xingji. The last one, Shen Li did not hear from other people's mouth, she did not know. But when she and Xingji met the goddess in the demonic realm's court, Shen Li had to say that she saw it at a glance. She is the king by Song, Shen Li. The demon king just finished introducing Shen Li, and Shen Li had not had time to nod. The goddess saluted Xingji and asked, "I don't know why you will go with King by Song?" This problem Shen Li naturally would not be stupid to answer her, just looked at Xingji, saw how he would answer. He smiled faintly and said, "Just walking together, what's so strange about it?" The goddess looked serious. "Now King Bite Song is the wife of my brother, and it is not appropriate for you to walk with her." Speaking of this, Xingji did not care about other things and explained, "This is not going to happen with the King Bite Song. I had planned to travel around before going back to heaven, but I suddenly saw Yangzhou City be full of miasma. I was curious to go and explore. This time I met King Bite Song looking for Rongjun in the city. The miasma matter is very big, so we will investigate together, and later, Rongjun should say it to you. King Bite Song suffered a little poison. It is not appropriate to return to the demonic realm, so I will let Rongjun go first to inform the news, and I will help her to expel the gas." Thus Elle delayed the time back. Some words were true and some were false, and the speaking was natural. He was not afraid that the party will expose him. Xingji looked at the goddess to smile with deep gaze. "So, goddess can still feel what is wrong?" The goddess saw it and her cheek became red slightly, quickly turned her head. "Heavenly Emperor are doing his own things. It is Yulan's fault. I hope you will forgive." Beauty was really helpful. Shen Li believed as this, but there was a bit of disdain in her heart. She smiled slightly and turned around. Xingji glanced at Shen Li and smiled, continuing to ask Yulan, "What is goddess here for?" "It is for the invitation of Blossom Feast." Yulan replied, "The Blossom Feast, 300-year-old a time, will be held next month. And the queen let me send the invitation to the demon king and invite him to the feast." Xingji nodded. "LF, you don't say that, I almost forgot about it." Yulan said with a smile, "It is no problem for Heavenly Emperor to forget it. Some days later, Elle will send it to you." Demon King. The chilling call of Shen Li broke the inexplicable pink emotion in the room. "There is a poison matter of facts in the human realm, Yangzhou, that I have something to inform." Begging the demon, "Can you end this?" Stared at the demon king, the words were sharp and Yulan squinted at her. Yulan dwarfed her body, bowed, "If so, Yulan will leave." She went out slightly, and squinted her eyes in front of closing the door. The room was quiet, and Shen Li's light turned to stop on Xingji. "Don't Heavenly Emperor go? Are you going to listen to the politics of the devils?" Xingji's eyebrows were slightly moved, and the anger of Shen Li was disappeared. On the contrary, his eyes were filled with smile. Don't go, I said earlier, the miasma of Yangzhou is very important, so it is natural for me to stay and listen. Shen Li still wanted to drive him out, and the Demon King swayed his hand. The things of the demon realm do not dare to hide to the heavenly emperor. Shen Li, let's talk. Shen Li had to endure the fire, and adjusted the tone to Demon King. This time, the report of miasma matter may be incomplete by Fu Rongjun. Before the discovery of the thief's nest, we found that the land gods disappeared everywhere. All of them were robbed by thieves. I don't know what they are going to do. And then they all say that the people who catch them are with demon gas, and they are suspected to be the people of the devil. When I fight against the thief, I also feel that he is with demon gas. I know the name of the person, Fu Xing. Demon King, do you know when did the devil have such a person? Fu Xing, the voice of the Demon King was slightly heavy. He had been thought for a long while. I have never heard of such a person. Can his magic still be strong? He will be not simply to make you injury seriously. Shen Li shook her head. It was not Fu Xing who hurt me, but a few monsters he raised. They looked like human beings, or monsters, but they still had some intellectual minds. The 3 monsters were very powerful and well matched. When they finally died, they can also listen to the order to revive. Thinking of the scene, Shen Li cannot help but frown. There are only a few monsters like this. It will be a bad thing to make hundreds of them. Her words surprised the Demon King. Maid? His fingertips deducted twice on the table. Maid. Xingji looked at the devil. What does Demon King think of? Just say it. The Demon King sighed. No, nothing. He paused for a while. Are there other situations? There is nothing redundant. Just these points make us have to guard against them. The Demon King nodded. I will send people to go to the human realm to inspect. His tone is a little slower. You and the Heavenly Emperor should be tired. It is better to go back and take a break. This will be not solved, though we are also anxious. He raised his hand and touched the head of Shen Li. Firstly, raise your body. You haven't rested recently. Shen Li let him kneaded twice. Demon King must not be too worried. If the thief dares to act against the devil, Shen Li will make them to cry back. The Demon King smiled slightly and shook his head. Go back. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 42. Mo Feng stepped forward, pushing Shen Li behind him. With a cupped fist salute he said, Her Highness did not mean to offend Goddess. Xingji narrowed his eyes. His tone was slightly raised when he spoke. Oh, General Mo Feng knows Her Highness's mind? That is indeed rare. Hearing the ill will in Xingji's tone made Mo Feng frown. He was about to reply, but Shen Li beat him to it. Why bother making things more difficult for yourself, Mo Feng? Shen Li dragged Mo Feng back by the wrist. She gave him a quick look of dissatisfaction. Mo Feng stared blankly back for a moment, not understanding. However, he dropped his eyes like an obedient child and quickly situated himself behind Shen Li. Goddess Lu spoke rudely to my general. I couldn't bear it. How exactly did I bully her? Shen Li looked at Xingji before continuing. High God, it looks like you're only here to criticize and help her bully me. Xingji's voice became even more strange. Oh? Is your highness angry for your general? You treat your men like they're little children. Better than High God who plays at being the hero for the damsel. Shen Li didn't hold back. She countered in a bitingly, cold tone. She expected him to get angry at her outburst, but he didn't. Instead, she could see an ever so slight upward quirk of his lips. With gloomy eyes, she retreated a step. Xingji's expression was unexpectedly cheery. It instantly reminded her of the past, and anger burst in her chest. It was like before, he was playing her in the palm of his hand again. It was a two-man show with her being the puppet. Damn it. Fine. She narrowed her eyes, refusing to bite farther onto the bait he extended. This fish was going to swim away even if it meant tearing a bloody hole in her cheek to escape. How treacherous. To harm herself just to get away. Xingji thought he had nailed her securely to the hook only to watch her escape. Shen Li's face cooled. If High God wishes to avenge the goddess, then please report the wrong to the demon emperor. I will accept whatever punish is called for. Now if you'll excuse me, I will be leaving. Shen Li dragged Mo Feng away with her without waiting for Xingji to reply. Yulan, still feeling thoroughly wronged, stared at Shen Li's retreating figure, then at Xingji's enigmatic expression as he too looked at Shen Li leaving. The people of the demon realm don't know how to behave according to proper etiquette. For the Azure Sky King to treat a heavenly person this way. The allegiance she pledged is surely insincere. It will cause disaster one day. Xingji turned to her and nodded his head. Then he said, that's the way she is. It may be bad, but she might squeeze your neck the next time you provoke her. There was a chilly undertone to his voice. Who knows, your corpse may not even stay in one piece. Yulan felt a sudden chill on her neck. She looked at Xingji weakly. If that happens, will High God oversee justice for me? Xingji gave Yulan a kind smile as he spoke, but his voice was firm. That is unlikely. The demon emperor is very fond of the Azure Sky King and will likely defend her. It is unlikely the heavenly realm will go to war. After all, maintaining a peaceful relationship between the two realms is very important. However, goddess may rest in peace. I will be sure to place some fruit as tribute for you. Yulan remained standing in the garden as, in a daze, she watched the fluttering movements of Xingji's white robes as he walked away. Shen Li's pace was fast as she walked out of the palace. It wasn't until Mo Feng whispered, Your Highness, that she slowed down. He shot her a glance before asking, Why are you angry all of a sudden? Angry? Shen Li abruptly stopped. Unable to react in time, Mo Feng collided into her back. The force made her stagger and nearly fall down, which in turn caused Mo Feng to frantically grab for her waist. Shen Li was preoccupied and didn't notice his actions. Mo Feng, on the other hand, was quite red-faced. He quickly released her and took 2 steps back once she was steady on her feet again. With a thud, he knelt on both knees and with another thud executed a fierce kowtow. Your Highness, please forgive me. He looked like he'd been caught committing a grievous crime. Shen Li glanced at him. It wasn't a big deal and she didn't take it to heart, but Mo Feng's reaction made her feel embarrassed. She coughed twice. There was no harm done. Stand. Mo Feng rose slowly but kept his chin tucked to his chest. Shen Li couldn't see his face, but she could see how red his ears were. She turned her head away, pretending to not notice. In a low voice she said, I just finished straightening out the goddess, but High God Xingji came by and ruined it. Why wouldn't I be annoyed? Mo Feng had wanted to say something, but he lost his train of thought. Instead he said, so it is then. Besides, even if High God Xingji is incredibly powerful, he wouldn't dare do anything excessive to me here. Shen Li paused as she tried to find a reason. It's just that there wasn't anyone else around and High God Xingji is really hard to pin down. I could only suffer in silence, so I was trying to get away as fast as I could. Of course. Shen Li resumed walking as she continued. That goddess spoke so rudely to you. If I hadn't been there, would you have just accepted the humiliation? Yes, Your Highness. Huh? Why should my men yield to those in heaven? They're arrogant and willful about everything. They ride roughshod over people and bully the weaker mortals. It's clearly a problem with their house, but they try to shift the blame onto someone else. Listen, if either of them give you trouble in the future, whether it's Fu Rongjun or his sister, you let me know, and I will be glad to use martial law to punish them. Troubling our generals like this, it's shameful. They're slapping us in the face. Your Highness says this, but Mo Fong raised his head. I'm afraid it would be inappropriate. Both Fu Rongjun and Goddess were the Heavenly Emperor's grandchildren. Plus Fu Rongjun was Shen Li's fiancé. If they forced the issue, he was afraid Shen Li would have a hard time later. There's nothing wrong with it. We can't let outsiders think our generals are easy to bully. Shen Li waved her hand. Come on. Your Highness, wait. Shen Li turned around at Mo Fong's call. Feeling that his gaze was not properly respectful, he dropped his head down and looked at the floor. I heard Your Highness was injured in the mortal realm. Oh, that. It was nothing, just killing a couple of Yashou. Mo Fong knelt on one knee. My impulsiveness caused Your Highness to be punished and sent to the mortal realm to search for Fu Rongjun. And now, Your Highness is so injured. I deserve severe punishment. Demon generals didn't have the best personalities, particularly Mo Fong. He was very short-tempered. Back then Fu Rongjun had been so annoying that Mo Fong impulsively kicked him. This led to an angry Fu Rongjun running away to the mortal realm, which of course led to the Demon Emperor sending Shen Li down to retrieve him. Shen Li had been confused why Mo Fong hadn't gotten angry with the goddess. It turned out he was holding himself back because of the aftermath with Fu Rongjun. He hadn't wanted his actions to affect her. Unexpectedly, Mo Fong still felt guilty about the whole affair. She sighed, then she said, "Rise." He didn't get up, so she stepped forward and forcefully yanked him up. Okay, it's your fault. You made the demon realm lose face today. As punishment, you must drink. Do you accept? Mo Fong stared intensely at Shen Li's hands holding his shoulders. She dropped her hands when she noticed. Mo Fong nodded. I will do as Your Highness commands. Great. Better to do so now than later. Shen Li waved her hand. All right, let's walk back to the barracks. You can tell me the names of everyone not on duty, and we can drink together. Yes, Your Highness. Mo Fong looked at Shen Li as she listened to the soldier names be called out. His gaze was soft. A flash of white caught his eye as he turned his head. Though that person's expression was unchanged, his eyes were definitely lonely looking. Seeing the eye-catching figure made his lips quirked upward slightly at the sight. Turns out bullying someone felt pretty nice. Everyone was a mess that night after 3 rounds of drinks. The servants had to support their respective generals home. The tavern sent notice to Roya to pick Shen Li up, but when she got there, a drunken Shen Li refused and used the excuse of not wanting her drunkenness to disturb High God Xingji. After saying so, she turned away dismissively. There was no way Roya would be able to move Shen Li. She could only look to Mo Fong and ask, "General, what should we do? If Your Highness does not wish to return home, then how about spending the night at my residence?" Mo Fong said after a moment of silence. Shen Li nodded. Okay. With that decided, Roya returned home and Mo Fong helped Shen Li walk back to his home. The streets were deserted, and the lights were just bright enough to illuminate the pathway. It was silent but for the sounds of footsteps, one stumbling, the other sure and steady. He glanced at Shen Li, who had nearly fallen asleep. Her Highness guarded her heart fiercely, but allowed others to see her unguarded tipsy self, even letting him take her to his home. She trusted him, had complete confidence in the demon realm. It really was too much. Mo Fong looked at the road in front of them. "Your Highness, I don't want this walk to end," he said softly. Shen Li wasn't completely lucid and misheard. "Ah, yes, the stars are nice. Let's go to the roof and look at the stars." The sentence, so out of the blue, made Mo Fong laugh. "Yes, let us gaze at the stars from my rooftop." Roya was just closing the gates of the estate when, out of nowhere, a figure in white surprised her. With her hand to her chest she asked, "High God is still up?" Standing there, nearly scared me witless. There was a nice breeze so I came out to enjoy it." "Your master has not returned yet?" Roya smiled. "Oh, it turned out High God was waiting for Highness." "No, Highness was a little drunk so she's staying at General Mo Fong's place. If there is something on High God's mind, there's no harm in waiting until tomorrow when Highness comes back to discuss it." Xingji nodded. "I'll go out and enjoy the breeze." He materialized through the wall, not waiting for Roya to open the gate. "This High God sure acts like a ghost." Shen Li reclined comfortably once she climbed up onto the roof. A realization struck her heart as the cool night air sobered her. Gazing at the stars on top of a roof alone with her subordinate, this situation, if anyone saw, it would be too ambiguous. But she just got there. To leave so soon would be awkward. Out of the corner of her eye she saw Mo Fong silently sit down next to her. Shen Li was stuck, so she decided to stay put for the time being. Who knew how long they sat there silently looking at the sky when Mo Fong finally broke the silence. "Did your Highness see any stars?" Shen Li shook her head. "There's too much miasma. I couldn't see any." Mo Fong turned to look at her directly. "I saw." Shen Li wasn't dense. She looked Mo Fong in the eyes. Under normal circumstances she would have ordered him to look away and wipe those thoughts from his mind. But for some reason she couldn't do it today. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Maybe she was too drunk, maybe the cool breeze was doing things to her, or maybe something happened to her heart today. "Why?" She raised an arm up and looked at the back of her hand. "This hand is covered in blood, have only held a spear, never touched a sewing needle. The owner of such hands, what makes me worthy of your attentions in this way?" The question surprised Mo Fong. How was she not worthy? He stared in silence at her for a moment before speaking. "There are differences between your Highness and ordinary women, but there are similarities as well. The way I see it, your red-tasseled spear is your needle and the demon realm the fabric with which you embroider the beautiful mountains and lakes on." Shen Li stared hard at Mo Fong. Her face was a comical half-smile as she sighed. "Mo Fong, you always say the silliest things. Also, you shouldn't spill your secrets so easily." "I didn't misspeak. Nor was I using empty flattery. You really are someone worthy of me admiring and loving." "That won't work," Shen Li finally said after being silent for a long time. She dropped her arm. "It won't do." He knew it was impossible. He looked down, hiding his eyes. "I know our statuses are different. I know I should not dare, but I wanted to let your Highness know how I felt." Status wasn't the issue. It was because she couldn't let go. Azure Sky King. "So it was you. You're trying to steal my man?" The sudden scolding came from below. Shen Li moved over and saw an excessively frilly dressed Fu Rongjun looking up at them with an angry face. He pointed at her. This is too much. The two reacted differently. Shen Li raised an eyebrow, while Mo Feng's face sank, but he did not get angry. Your Highness, it will be better if you return home and stay away for a bit. Huh? Stay away? Have you forgotten what I just said earlier? I will punish you with martial law later. Shen Li teleported to Fu Rongjun. It seems like your memory is really bad. She raised her fist, wanting to beat him. Fu Rongjun raised his arms protectively in front of his face as he shouted. High God! Do you see how she treats me? How can you force me to marry her? Shen Li's arm stiffened. She turned her head and saw Xingji leaning against the wall underneath the eaves. Had he been there since she got on the roof with Mo Feng? Had he been listening to them talk? How ill-mannered. Xingji could see her eyes were as cool as ever, but the smile she had on her face didn't reach her eyes. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 43. Fan Jingchuan spent the whole spring teaching Feng Fengxing, and the days were serene and tranquil. Meanwhile, this year's first batch of salt was ready for shipment. In the past, Fengxing would only hear about the prevalence of private salt smuggling. As to how the smuggling was accomplished, her knowledge was limited only to stratagems on paper. This time, she seized the opportunity to wade to distant parts of the county. Uncle Yu was now in charge of outside affairs. Maybe because he originated from a Jianghu 1 background, he was quite familiar with certain underdealings. He also bunched up a group of people of unknown origins, who appeared all but ordinary. However, to say that they were part of the Jianghu, because of their weather-beaten state, Fengxing was unbelieving. She had watched no less historical plays, and the Jianghu people in those plays were not in such dire straits. After asking Uncle Yu, Fengxing realized that these people truly were common Jianghu people. They could work as bodyguards or armed escorts, ordered about by rich and influential households, or even become outlaws. These Jianghu people were truly not as glamorous as marketplace novels professed. They were mostly entangled in shameful and shady business, close to licking blood off the tip of a knife. Perhaps they were once well regarded, but only for a time. For the most part, they lived lonely and dreary lives once older. Those Uncle Yu had gathered were not young. They were all in their 30s, 40s, or so. There were men, women, young and old, and some were handicapped or had families to support. When they first met Fengxing, they immediately declared subservience to her, but Fengxing's initial response was utter puzzlement. After Uncle Yu's instruction, she later learned that the Jianghu had a rule: if the master offered a meal, they had to sell their lives to the master. These people were on no account elegant and tasteful, even ugly, old, and handicapped, but they were Jianghu veterans. A single one was worth the ability of 10. Uncle Yu had used his previous contacts to herd them together. Fengxing's undertaking this time was quite huge. On the surface, it played out a flourishing scene of prosperity, but in reality, growing crises threatened from all sides. She was not only challenging imperial power, but also the whole of Taizhou, and even the Lianghuai Salt administration. Taizhou seemed to only be a single place, but in strict confidence was intricate and complicated, riddled with twisted roots and gnarled branches. Thus, she needed helpers, and these people were the first. In this regard, Fengxing didn't refuse. Uncle Yu's arrangements were quite convenient. These people's efficiency far exceeded her expectations. During this period, there was no shortage of provocations. Fengxing had been twice assailed when she ventured out, but fortunately, they had thwarted both attempts. Recently, Uncle Yu would travel alongside Fengxing if he was available. If Uncle Yu wasn't, at least 2 or more people, either overtly or covertly, would accompany her. The person who often trailed after Fengxing, one called Dao Qi, was a middle-aged man whose one eye was blind. He was said to be very adept at wielding knives, and was once a swordsman mixing with a caravan. 2. The other was Huxin Yang, Dao Qi's wife. Her family was said to have been involved in the bodyguard business, but the business collapsed for reasons unknown. She eventually mingled with the Jianghu and married Dao Qi. Uncle Yu regarded Dao Qi and Huxin Yang as his brother and sister, and only after this experience was Fengxing able to loosely grasp Uncle Yu's past. She had previously discerned Uncle Yu's history to be far from simple, that he hailed from the Jianghu and somehow chanced upon her father. She now also knew that he used to be a member of a caravan. This was their first time shipping out goods. Fengxing took it very seriously and brought 5 or 6 people with her to converge with Uncle Yu. The place of delivery was within Haiyan Town's vicinity. Nearby were the Salt Transport Canal and the Chuancheng River. The area was desolate and uninhabited, indeed an apt choice of place. They first arrived at Haiyan Town, and after contacting Uncle Yu, they rode out early the next morning. Upon reaching the place, Uncle Yu had already led their people and the other party to commence delivery. Those in charge of loading and unloading goods were attired like ordinary laborers, but were very quick with their hands and feet. It was apparent that they were accustomed to such work, and during the whole process, neither crow nor sparrow could be heard. If it wasn't for the white lantern hanging from a tree and Uncle Yu standing underneath it, she would have thought she was in the wrong place. Fengxing noiselessly walked up to Uncle Yu, who watched her amble over but uttered no word. The shipment transpired until the dawn sky's marble white color emerged in the east. The sky gradually lightened, and the whole activity reached its end. As the last bag of salt was hauled onto the ship, out came a man, clad in short black hemp clothes and a red belt. With a flourish of this man's hand, the 5 salt ships quietly vanished into the morning mist. "Uncle Yu, how was it?" "Those people were from the salt gang. I never expected that Inspector surnamed Go to be involved with them." Fengxing didn't understand, so Uncle Yu briefed her about the salt gang's history. This so-called salt gang actually used to be a group of private salt smugglers, but later on evolved into a gang as their numbers grew. Their forerunner flew hither and thither in the Lianghuai area and sold private salt. This kind of work wasn't anything worth praising, but the former salt gang leader was quite talented. He was very resourceful and was able to bridge connections with several salt merchants. He was especially responsible for assisting them in salt transport to the local government's designated sale areas. Regarding this, the distribution and certification system needed be mentioned. Only those possessing a salt certificate were qualified to sell salt. This word certificate not only pertained to the salt certificate, but also to the certified costs. 3 After a salt merchant purchased salt and paid the Salt Distribution Commission's salt tax, the salt would then be transported to a designated sale area hinged on the local government's regulations, but they were limited to areas within the border. These designated sale areas were the alleged certified coasts. For example, the salt produced in the Lianghuai Salt District could only be distributed and sold to the 6 provinces of Jiangsu, Anhui, Jiangxi, Hunan, Hubei, and Henan. Except for Henan, Jiangsu, and Anhui, which were a little closer to the origin, other provinces were far away. Moreover, with distance afar and mountains high, many places had no smooth waterways, so they could only traverse the dry road. Consequently, they fell prey to several accidents. When salt merchants traveled long distances, they had to expend a lot of manpower and material resources. The gang leader took advantage of this and offered the salt merchants their assistance in transport, which was a win-win situation for both sides. In this way, the ostensible salt gang assumed the task of a porter transporting goods, but in reality undertook much more than that. As said before, the salt gang was formerly a group of private salt smugglers. They arose from the private salt trade. Now, how could they let go of such a good opportunity? Therefore, while helping salt merchants distribute goods, they would also surreptitiously mix in with them and glean great benefits. Because salt merchants were qualified to carry out the distribution, in order to avoid accidents during the transport and sales, the salt gang could also carry a certain amount of force to protect themselves. This way, the salt gang transformed black to white and dark to light, that even they could be considered to have taken the legal path in the eyes of the imperial court. Uncle Yu knew all these because the caravan he used to be a part of actually trafficked in horses, tea, and even private salt. They could be deemed peers of the same trade, but the caravan and salt gang operated two different salt routes. One sphere of activity was in the coastal and inland areas, while the other in the southwest and the highlands. After hearing Uncle Yu's explanation, Fengxing was very surprised, but pleasantly so. I didn't expect Inspector Go to have such a path. I just assumed that he was exploiting the convenience of his role to carry out the smuggling. No, I should have considered it. If he was merely exploiting the convenience of his role and entrusting others to carry out the smuggling, how was he able to boast and get whatever he wanted? That said, our plan will be easier to carry out, Uncle Yu said. How many days will it take for the goods to be delivered? It will probably take another 3 or 4 days. After all, in a place like this, there are many eyes and ears. Even the salt gang has to pull wool over people's eyes. Fengxing nodded and replied, then I'll have to trouble Uncle Yu. I can't stay out for long. I still have to return to the county yamen. Fengxing led the people back to Taizhou City. As soon as she set foot on the county yamen, she heard that Prince Wei had sent someone to deliver a few things. Only when she went in and inquired did she find out that Prince Wei had once again visited Yangzhou. He had brought some things from the capital and especially ordered someone to deliver them. Fan Jinchuan received 2 books, which were said to be the only existing copies that Fan Jinchuan had long been searching for. Fengxing similarly received something else nestled in a box. The box's exterior was unimpressive. When she lifted the box open to check, contained within wasn't some precious object, but a bamboo section teapot. Fan Jinchuan was stunned and probed, why would His Highness Prince Wei send worthy brother Feng a teapot? The little eunuch who carried the item answered, Eunuch De had entrusted this slave the item for delivery. As for what's sent and the meaning behind it, this slave is ignorant. Thank His Highness Prince Wei for me, Fengxing said. The little eunuch nodded. Then, this slave will leave first to report back. Eunuch has come a long way. It's better to rest and stay for a while. I'll have someone lead you inside to rest. The eunuch didn't refuse, so Fengxing had someone lead him away. Only after the person departed did Fengxing tell Fan Jinchuan, Brother Zijin also likes getting to the heart of the matter. His Highness Prince Wei sent you some books. His subordinates probably found it improper sending presents only to you, so they brought something for me as well. This teapot was probably a casual addition. No need to take it seriously. I'm not taking it seriously. I just find it a little odd. What's so odd about it? That said, when Fengxing returned to her room with the teapot, she didn't look too pleased. She perched down across the table and drew the teapot out of the box. This bamboo section teapot was purplish red in its entirety, with a delicate texture and a smooth and graceful luster. Its form was inspired from the shape of bamboo. The teapot's belly was divided into 2 sections, and was sturdy, short, and flat. Its structure imitated a thick bamboo split from the middle, embedded on which was a bamboo relief sculpture, for rustic yet elegant. Fengshen opened the teapot lid, but there was nothing inside. It appeared to be an ordinary teapot. She ensconced it in her hand and gently stroked it twice, then set it on the table. She had figured out the key. One feared that Prince Wei sending her a gift was all a pretense. It was a warning in truth. The bamboo section teapot probably alluded to the word jia. He knew what she was doing? She recalled Prince Wei's repeated exhortations about how she shouldn't set herself on fire. Did he know the cryptic machinations behind the whole incident? Did he know the perpetrators responsible, those she could never afford to provoke? All these were merely Fengshen's conjectures, after all. She cared little about Prince Wei's meddling, let alone listen to him. Everything was developing smoothly. At least, it was for Fengshen. Because of the official salt stagnation in the recent years, the salt tax had decreased by a wide margin and had already attracted the court's attention. Since the start of the year, bulk merchants were only able to sell 3 or 4/10 of the distributed official salt. The quantity of transported and sold goods fell short, so it was only natural for there to be a substantial decrease in salt tax revenue. When news came up, the whole court was in breathless stagnation. The Jianping emperor lost his temper at the Qianqing palace, terrifying those around him lest they hit the wrong nerve. 2 days later, the Jianping emperor ordered the Lianghuai Salt Administration, as well as the Salt Distribution Commission, to personally write memorials explaining why the salt tax revenue, which could reach up to 10 million taels the past years, plummeted to 3 to 4 million taels, with even a downward trend. Did the people of Great Zhou stop consuming salt? This rebuke was so severe that all the officials dared not defend themselves against it. The Salt Control Imperial Censor, Gu Baichang, and the newly appointed Salt Distribution Commissioner, He Luan, dawdled for about 10 days before their self-written memorials arrived at the capital in succession. For a time, everyone kept their eyes peeled on these 2 memorials. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 44. In the ninefold sky, the clouds are overflowing with color. The heavenly emperor in the Tianjin temple is shaking his head and sighing. Someone knocked softly on the door, and the waiter outside whispered, "Emperor, the high god is here. Please, please, let him enter." The emperor got up to welcome him. When Xingji walked in, he clasped his fists and bowed. "High god has been away for a long time." Xingji lightly smiled and replied, "Even outside the door, I could still hear the emperor sigh and sigh. Can the emperor be upset?" The emperor smiled. "The heavens are stable and comfortable. Only the abnormal movement of the lower realms can make people a little more vigilant. What else could possibly happen?" The emperor led the way into the room and pointed to the jade on the table. He said, "I sighed like this today because I saw a jade cup at Tianyuan Xianjun a few days ago. I was overjoyed. I wanted to find a cup and exchange it with Tianyuan Jun, but he loved the cup very much. He refused to exchange with me." The emperor sighed as if he was very sad. When he stopped, he smiled slightly without words. Compared with the demon's world, the days in heaven were really comfortable. "I don't know what to do. I really loved that jade cup, but I can't ask for it now. It's really regrettable. If I force Tianyuan to give me, I'll lose my face. It is really distressing. If it's not meant to be, naturally you should let it go." This was originally words of comfort to the emperor, but as soon as he said the words, Xingji himself bowed his eyebrows, and inadvertently pulled out his lips in an inexplicable arc. 3-point coolness, 7-point self-deprecating. It won't be good to lose control. The emperor also shook his head and smiled. I have lived for so long, always telling myself to be pure-hearted. This is the first time I encountered something I like. No matter, this encounter, I cannot control it, it is just a hopeless situation. Yes. Xingji responded a little distracted. Unable to let it go, he finally gave up his heart, but he was unwilling. The purer, the more persistent, he shook his head and laughed. The emperor's problem, I myself don't have the answer. The emperor took a look at Xingji. What kind of thing did you want to see in the lower realm? Xingji smiled quietly, and the emperor hurriedly said. This can't be done. If the high god has this kind of thoughts, that's a disaster for the three realms. Xingji stopped looking down. The emperor is worrying too much. The emperor was relieved. It should be that I worry too much. Since ancient times, the purity of the high god is unmatched by the immortals today. Xingji smiled and changed the subject. I'm here to find the emperor to tell you something. Xingji told the emperor of Fu Rong's actions in the demon world, and the emperor turned blue when he heard it. He immediately ordered people to go to Jiangfu to fetch Fu Rong. When Fu Rong arrived and saw Xingji, he knew that he was in trouble, so he tried to leave, but the emperor already started talking. The 100 Flowers banquet will be held soon. If the gods return to the sky, outside the sky would be troublesome, so it is better to stay here for a while. Xingji pondered and nodded his head and said, all right, I haven't visited my old friends for a long time. Jun Fu Rong was punished to kneel. He kneeled there on the long steps in front of the Tianjun Hall for 9 days and 9 nights. The cold jade steps in front of the Tianjun Hall were too cold. It looked beautiful, but after kneeling on, he could not see the beauty of it. Jun knelt and fainted and woke up. He passed out and woke up a few times, confessed his mistake until his voice was hoarse. In the end, his parents went to intercede for him along with his brothers. The emperor only slightly calmed down and sent him back to his house. Since then, Jun Fu Rong has written down the hatred for Xingji, but the gap between them is too big. He can't get revenge anyhow, he can only hate him. Before his body could recover, Fu Rong heard the news that Shen Li of the demon realm was coming to the banquet on behalf of the demon lord. The heavenly emperor had the same idea as the demon lord and arranged for Shen Li to stay in Fu Rong's yard. The intention was to let the two start a relationship. What else can they do? If Shen Li doesn't take advantage of this to kill him, then thank God. Thinking about this, Fu Rong was awake all night with sorrow, and sighed constantly, making the people around him unhappy. However, no matter how sad Fu Rong was, it couldn't prevent the disaster, and Shen Li finally came. The gatekeeper knew that the Azure Sky King had arrived at the southern heaven gate alone, so he sent someone to hurriedly inform the heavenly emperor. After a long time, the envoy came to lead Shen Li. The emperor leisurely said a few words, and asked about the situation of the demon realm. Soon after, he told his servant to take Shen Li to Fu Rong's mansion. Shen Li has never visited the heavens before. Although she has heard of the beauty of it, she didn't expect that such a beautiful place could exist in this world. There is an amiable mist everywhere, auspicious cranes passing by, and she could occasionally hear the sound of the fairy piano and smell the sweet fragrance of flowers. Shen Li followed the messenger through the heavens, rubbing shoulders with the fairies who were walking with them, feeling the soft fabric of their gorgeous dresses occasionally blowing in the wind, leaving a soft fragrance on her nose. Before reaching Fu Rong monarch's mansion, Shen Li didn't say a word, thinking of the people of the demon realm in her heart. Her eyes were a little gloomy. Greeting the king. The servant of the Fu Rong's mansion immediately went out to greet her. Royal Highness, forgive me, my master recently, suffered a penalty. He is recuperating right now, so he couldn't come personally to greet you. Shen Li could guess the cause and effect without thinking, so she nodded. It's okay, let Rongjun rest well. It doesn't matter, she thought, this is also good, this way, she doesn't have to see him and make her mood worse. Seeing that Shen Li was so good at talking, the little servant raised his head and glanced at Shen Li boldly. He thought he would be a fierce female looking like a sturdy man, but he didn't expect to be just a girl who dressed a little like a man. He was slightly startled and blinked for a while. He quickly recovered and led Shen Li into the house. King, enters the mansion first, your residence and people to serve you have already been arranged for you. Shen Li nodded, and entered the mansion. Jun Rong made arrangements. Her servant was a very smart girl, her big eyes blinking, and blinking was very pleasing. But Shen Li was a person who had experienced countless times on the battlefield, and she was born with a keen sense, she could easily sense the hostility from others. No matter how concealed the little girl's eyes, Shen Li still noticed her bad intentions immediately. She didn't take it to heart. From the moment the gatekeeper guard saw her when she arrived at the heavens, the look she received was not quite right. People here seemed jealous, or disdainful, or contemptuous. Shen Li knew that these were not for her personally, but only because she was a demon. She was even a little grateful. Fortunately, she was the one who came to this banquet, not the demon lord. Just thinking that the demon lord would be treated like this in the heavens, Shen Li felt unspeakable anger. Shen Li only thought that the little girl who came to serve her was the same as other immortal gods, prejudiced against demons, but she never thought that in that same night she would taste that malice in her own food. The big-eyed girl was waiting by her side. Shen Li took a bite, swallowed it into her stomach, and then took another bite, casually. Does heaven also sell poison? She chewed something in her mouth, her tone was flat. It's a pity, but I think the person who bought this will lose money. The big-eyed girl was startled, her face paled, and she turned her head and ran outside. But before her foot crossed the threshold, a silver light shot down in front of her eyes, and she heard a clang sound. The furious silver spear was inserted in front of the girl. She gasped with fright, her legs weakened, and she fell straight in the ground. The person who dares to poison this king actually only has this much courage. Shen Li was still eating her food leisurely. The heavens really raise stupid things. Why are you here? How can you be worth of Lord Rong? Such a despicable demon. These words really struck at Shen Li's nerves. She put down her chopsticks, laughed angrily for a long time, thinking that there was too many ways to refute this girl. But instead she just said, since you like Lord Rong so much, let's go to the Emperor's palace together, to make things clear, and ask him to grant a marriage for you and Lord Rong, since you are the one who deserves him. The big-eyed girl was startled to see that Shen Li actually got up and walked towards her. When she breathed out, again and again, she suddenly felt a strange fragrance drifting from the end of her nose, and her head was suddenly dizzy. Shen Li naturally smelled this too. Originally, this poison did not hurt her much, but now the drug finally merged in her body, and the effect of it was overwhelming, causing Shen Li to freeze in front of the girl with her limbs being slightly soft. At this moment, Shen Li frowned, her gaze turned, coming out of thin air. A poison needle was pinched between her fingers, and another was coming from the other side. She heard a faint sound of breaking through the air. Shen Li also reached out to catch it, but poison in the body interfered with her senses and made her miss it. At this time, a poisonous needle pierced Shen Li's fingertips, and the venom instantly spread to the whole body from the fingertips, making the whole body paralyzed. At the same time, two other women all appeared in the house. One raised the big-eyed girl from the ground, and the three stared at Shen Li, looking at her like she was her worst enemy. Lord Rong was never yours, and never will be. The corner of Shen Li's mouth twitched. She pulled out the silver needle from her fingertips and rubbed her painful forehead. These celestial girls' imaginations are really something. I think they are lacking some lessons. She rolled her sleeves and walked towards the three of them. The three of them were so frightened that Shen Li felt it was funny. So many poisons, and still is impossible for you. Shen Li smiled coldly, being poisoned by Junrong's presence for so long, this king will let you see what a real man is today. That night, the screaming and crying of the woman in the Fu Rong monarch's mansion awakened most of the heavens. Jun Fu Rong also woke up from his sleep, punched the bed board, and said, "What is it? Is this a female ghost?" The servant outside the door opened the door tremblingly. "My lord, this seems to be from the Azure King courtyard." Jun Fu Rong was taken aback, and he immediately ordered someone to lift himself to the entrance of Shen Li courtyard. The courtyard door was open, and 3 fairies were tied with their hands on the beams of the room. The brazier was burning, and the 3 of them were crying and crying. Shen Li sat idly aside, using her silver spear. From time to time she poked the firewood in the basin to make the flames burn more vigorously. "Cry, wait until the tears have poured out the brazier, and this king will stop." Jun Fu Rong, people who always pity and cherish jade, were furious at this scene. "Shen Li, what are you doing?" Shen Li glanced at Jun Fu Rong obliquely. "The 3 of them wanted to die for you. This king is fulfilling their wishes. Lord, please, Lord, save me." The 3 cried loudly, and Fu Rong's knee hurt so much that he barely couldn't stand up. He slapped the servant next to him on the head and cursed, "What are you still doing here? Go save them." "Who dares to save?" Shen Li's eyes condensed. She stuck the red tasseled spear on the ground, the bricks and stones cracked. A flash of silver light accompanied by Shen Li's faint voice shook everyone's heartstrings. "First fight with this king." She glanced at the people outside the courtyard faintly, and her eyes trembled with fury. Everybody looked at each other, but no one dared to step forward. The 3 fairies cried alarmingly. There have been many people outside Monarch Fu Rong's mansion. Everyone came to ask what happened. In the end, the emperor made a noise and entered Fu Rong's mansion. He uttered a loud scolding, and then Shen Li turned off the fire, broke the rope, and put down the 3 of them. She said to the emperor, who arrived in the middle of the night, "Shen Li remembers that when Lord Fu Rong and Lord Xingji were in my demon world, although the demon world is not as beautiful as the heaven, we also spare a good deal of courtesy and treated them well. Now Shen Li only came, and on the first night, someone tried to poison me. Her food is still on the table, the strange fragrance was still in the air, as well as the silver needle that hit Shen Li. Only this night, I received a 3-point gift. Dare to ask the emperor, is this how does heaven treat guests?" The emperor was shocked when he heard this. Immediately went to check the food, and the needle. He saw that the facts presented were true. The emperor's face was purple with anger, and he pointed at Jun Fu Rong without speaking for a long time. With a final sigh, he said to Shen Li, "It was my inconsideration that caused Azure to suffer this unpleasant thing. The 3 fairies will be confined for 100 years from now on." Shen Li said, "Thank you, Emperor, for advocating justice for Shen Li. But Shen Li is still here and will stay here for a while. Lord Fu Rong is also here. Shen Li is afraid that something will happen again. None of these girls' tricks can hurt Shen Li's essence, but who knows how many women or men Lord Fu Rong has provoked. Only this night there were 3 of them. It's better to be cautious." Shen Li didn't say these words, but the emperor should be able to think that, so she bowed and said, "I also hope that the emperor will find another quiet place for Shen Li." The emperor pondered a little. At the same time, the servants around the heavenly emperor whispered a few words to him, and the heavenly emperor nodded and said, "There is a quiet courtyard in the west of the heaven realm, but the location is slightly off, and the interior layout is also slightly simple. I wonder if Azure King will dislike it. People who can ride in the clouds and drive the fog aren't afraid of the distance, and a simple courtyard of heaven still must be better than what she is used to. So she said, as long as it is quiet, Shen Li will move there tomorrow. The emperor nodded. Well, it's okay, you have already met the high god when you were in the demon world before, and it won't be embarrassing if you live together. The only one in this heaven that can be called high god is. Why didn't the emperor said that sooner? Shen Li opened her mouth, but it was too late to refuse. It would be embarrassing for them to live together. It would be embarrassing, okay. Welcome to my channel, this is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 45. On the next day, Shen Li was not in a hurry to go to the place called Shiyuan arranged by the Emperor of Heaven, and she even resisted a little bit, so she wandered around the heavenly realm. It would be pleasant if were not for the way everyone was looking at her. Carefully scrutinizing, it wasn't just one or two, everyone looked at her like this, which really made Shen Li feel unbearable. She wasn't angry or feeling wronged, she was just annoyed. If they really didn't like her, just lift a knife and slash. Why this passive-aggressive behavior? Shen Li couldn't stand it at last. Instead of being watched like this, she might as well go to Shiyuan and be embarrassed with Xingji. What surprised Shen Li was that when she arrived at the legendary courtyard, there was no one inside, and it was quiet, like no one lived in it for years. She was even more surprised when she noticed that the layout of this small courtyard was exactly the same as that small courtyard on Earth they used to live. There were trees and plants, stone tables and chairs in the front yard, and a small pond dug under the vines in the backyard. The room is much larger than before, and there are many wing rooms on both sides. The wooden structure of the house does not show how many years it has been built. It gave a timeless feeling. Compared to Xing Yan's house, Xingji reincarnation as human, from the beginning of the novel, this should be considered an upgraded luxury version, but for those in the heavens that ain't used to using luminous glass to make tiles and precious woods for houses, this house was indeed really simple. Such an environment also let Shen Li subconsciously relax her guard. Shen Li thought to herself, his memory was not erased when he went to the lower realm, so his small courtyard must be arranged according to this layout. She still remembers that the furnishings here the same, so the formation must be present here too. Staying here will help her concentrate on clearing the toxins in her body. This poison that was worrying her was not the one left by the three fairies, but the poison borne by the monster she defeated back in the demon's world. She doesn't know how this poison was cultivated, that it took such deep roots. Even with Shen Li's fast recovery speed, it still took so long. There is still some residue, it is not easy to get rid of it. Shen Li strolled around the house leisurely, and couldn't help but think of the man of those days in the lower realm. With his white clothes, resting in the sun under the vines, so leisurely and contented, perhaps, only when he was in the lower realm, wearing a mortal body, that's why he could be so casual. Returning to High God's position, with too many emotions and scruples that Shen Li couldn't understand. Different identities can really change a person too much. Shen Li was distracted thinking about the past when she heard the sound of fish fiddling in the water. Shen Li glanced at the pond in the backyard and walked over to look at the fat koi swimming in the pond. She raised her eyebrows slightly, a fish that no one feeds can grow so fat. The water in the heavens is good. She sat down by the pond and fiddled with the clear water in the pool. Suddenly, a white and tender hand grasped Shen Li's wrist. Shen Li was startled, her eyes met a pair of big watery eyes, and then, with a flash of silver light, several pairs of crystal clear eyeballs stared directly at her face. These koi turned out to be children. She was still in a daze, and suddenly heard one of the children giggling, big sister is coming to play with us? Shen Li listened to the sound of splashing water and shook her head subconsciously, but there were already several pairs of white hands grabbing her arm. Sister, come to play. The children's crisp voice was like a reminder, pulling Shen Li into the pond. Shen Li sighed fiercely, and before she could do anything she was pushed to the bottom of the pond. The pond was much bigger than it seemed from outside. It was like a huge lake, but she still could see the light reflecting in the surface and illuminating even the bottom of the lake. Shen Li's fear of water is almost innate. She could hear the sound of water buzzing in her ears, and her heart panicked slightly. Fortunately, she can still control her emotions, but when the children with fishtails saw that she was trying to swim to the surface, dragged her ankles as if playing. Shen Li wasn't calm anymore. Watching these children giggling and showing their white teeth, Shen Li felt that these cute faces were just like ghosts from hell. She began to struggle, frantically scolded the children, but as soon as she opened her mouth, water poured into her throat. Unconsciously she tried to breathe, but more water came into her mouth. She started to kick the children, using her hands and feet together to reach the light. Her posture was ugly, and she wants to but couldn't scream. When she finally stuck her nose out of the water, before she could even take a breath, a little kid jumped out of the water in excitement, slamming Shen Li down again. Shen Li's heart was burning with anger. Just want to make a fire, boil the water in the pool, and scald these little kids, and when she comes ashore, pick them up and eat them one by one. But she didn't have the opportunity to resort to such a vicious trick. She only felt that the current around her had inexplicably become faster. Before she could react, a huge force pulled her out of the pond. Shen Li and several naked mermaid children fell to the ground like dead fishes. She clutched her chest and coughed vigorously, making her face blush. The children were also bouncing on the ground, a fishtail slowly turning into a human leg. Xingji put a white face towel on Shen Li's face, but Shen Li threw the face towel angrily, pointed at the well-dressed man in white, panting. Twice, twice. Xingji naturally knew that she was referring to the time when she was practically a chicken and he threw her in the pond for a bath. He just smiled and said, "This time was not my fault." He casually folded a thin vine, walked along, and gently twitched the white buttocks of the children on the ground. "Come on." The children clasped their bare buttocks, slightly aggrieved, and staggered into the house, with unstable steps. Xingji glanced at Shen Li. "I'll make it up to you." After a while, Shen Li eased her breath and calmed down. She heard noises from the house. It were the child crying. Shen Li thought about Xingji's breaking a thin vine, wondering whether Xingji was punishing those children. Shen Li thought, well, they should be punished. Entering the room, going around the screen at the door, she saw Xingji propping his head, reclining on the couch. The thin vines in his hands swaying from one to the other, and a row of naked children stood obediently in front of him, all of them with red eyes from crying. Seeing Shen Li coming in, Xingji glanced at her, and then looked at the children. Where's the apology?" The child at the end cried, wiped away tears, and said vaguely, "I'm sorry, oh, I didn't know you can't swim, oh, I will never play like this again." As soon as his voice fell, the other kid continued, "I'm sorry, oh, sorry. We just want to play with others too much." Then came the sound of apologies and sobbing, mixed with sniffles. The scene was a bit chaotic. A group of half-old children, bare butts, they seemed to be apologizing, but she couldn't understand a word from all the crying. After a while, Shen Li covered her face with one hand and waved the other to the children. "Okay, go back by yourself, it's not a big deal." The children choked, staring brightly at her, and nodded slightly. Then, suddenly they charged, running out like they were escaping from hell. The room was quiet, and then Xingji sat up straight. Since when did Azure King become so benevolent? Such a group of half-sized and small children crying in front of me with bare buttocks made me feel that I was abusing them. Like an old witch. Shen Li said patiently, only the High God can see this scene and be indifferent. No, I'm not really indifferent to them. Xingji played with the fine vine in his hand. In fact, I think their crying faces were very funny. TL/note, cough sadistic cough. Shen Li rubbed her temples. She thought it would be embarrassing to see Xingji again before when she was walking into the yard, she was even more convinced of it. However, after the incident, there was no embarrassment between the two. Shen Li only felt tired and cold because of the unintended bath. The Heavenly Emperor asked for a room to be arranged last night and today. Shen Li just wants to sleep peacefully. You can choose a room on the left side. Xingji couldn't believe that the first day of living together passed by in such a silly way. After that, nothing much happened. Although they lived in the same courtyard, they rarely saw each other. It was estimated that he was practicing in a closed house. Without seeing him, all the mental preparations Shen Li's had done were a waste, but this is good, she thought. If this situation can continue until the banquet, they will never meet again, of course, unless he attends the wedding banquet when she marries Fu Rong. With a pain in her head, Shen Li quietly glanced at the little carp spirit behind her from the bronze mirror. But the little carp spirit didn't realize that she was hurting Shen Li. She still combed happily. Your hair is really good, she said, but it's too thick and straight, not like a woman's hair at all. Shen Li didn't answer him. These little carp spirits were originally Xingji attendants, and they followed the order to serve her, but the more they serve, the more chaotic they became. Shen Li suddenly felt her back wet. A small carp spirit cleaning the room overturned the water basin that Shen Li used to freshen up. The water splashed all over the floor, wet Shen Li's back and the other carp spirit that was dressing Shen Li. Knowing that she had done something wrong, she stared at Shen Li with a blank and panicked expression. What are you doing? The carp spirit behind Shen Li was angry, and her hand forcefully pulled down many roots of Shen Li's hair. Shen Li held her head and took a deep breath. But in the end, she couldn't hold back the anger, and regardless of whether her hair was combed or not, she stood up and took the two children one by one. She lifted them up and shook them. Both of them turned into their koi shape. Shen Li embraced them, kicked the door open, and went out. Every time she saw one carp spirit, she used the same trick and finally threw all the fat carp with different patterns in her arms into the pond. You are not allowed to come out. I will steam you if you come out again. She stood by the pool and threatened the little carp spirits viciously. Everyone had red eyes and their heads agreed on the water. One asked, but the god said, the king is different from the other immortals. If you don't eat, you will be hungry. If we don't serve you, the king will starve to death. I won't be hungry. Shen Li turned around and walked 2 steps before turning around to warn. Don't come out. The carp spirit stopped talking, only staring at Shen Li beamingly. Shen Li grabbed her hair and wanted to tie it up as easily as usual. When she looked back, she saw Xingji standing in his white robe and leaning against the door of his room, with the morning light reflected in his slightly bent eyes. Excessively beautiful. Why are you causing trouble early in the morning? Shen Li has held the fire in her stomach for a few days, so now she couldn't control anymore. You ordered them to add chaos to my life. Xingji raised his eyebrows. I never ordered anything like this. Little Carp said aggrieved, we are really just serving the king. Shen Li rubbed her forehead and blurted out, is this called serving? If you really want to serve me, then serve me yourself. This was originally Shen Li's angry words, but when her voice fell off, she didn't expect that Xingji would calmly say, okay. The air seemed to be quiet for a moment. Not only Shen Li was slightly startled, but also the little carp spirits in the pond. A soft sound of boom broke the silence. Shen Li turned her head and saw that the goddess Luo Tian stood at the door of the backyard in a daze. The fruit she was holding rolled all over the floor. She turned her head quietly and looked at her. "Why did Yulan come?" Yulan hurriedly bent over and picked up the fruit as if she came back to her senses, and explained. "Heavenly Emperor asked me to inform Azure King that today is the day to enter the Marrow Pond. I heard that the king would live with High God, so I stopped by to bring a few fairy fruits for the High God and the king. The courtyard door was open, so I came in directly." She didn't say any more, but everyone knew what she heard. Xingji just nodded, his expression was extremely calm. Shen Li coughed, turned, and left. "Since it is the order from the Heavenly Emperor, no delay, let's go quickly. The miasma of the demon realm is heavy, and Shen Li stays in the demon realm all year round. Purifying in the pond is one process that Shen Li knew before she came." Yulan looked at Shen Li's back walking quickly, then looked back and stopped, and finally bowed, put the fruit in the house, and left with Shen Li. "Master." Leaving Xingji courtyard, Yulan suddenly called Shen Li, as if after pondering for a long time, she finally couldn't help but speak. "Yulan went to the demon realm a few days ago. Although she hasn't been to the demon realm for too long, she still has seen the environment of the demon world. I know that the people of the demon clan must be dissatisfied with the heavens." Shen Li paused and looked back at her. "Goddess has something to say, just say straight." Yulan solemnly said, "But it's okay to be dissatisfied or to complain. I also hope that the king and the people of the demon world can make sense of it and accept it." She stared at Shen Li with a fixed gaze. "There is only one ancient god in these three realms, and no one can bear the cost of losing him." Shen Li suddenly remembered that Qingye's godhood, best friend of Xingji, reincarnated in Prince Rue, was cut off because of his personal love. He went against the heavens. So Yolan's words mean that she thinks the demon realm has the heart to rebel against the heavens, and Shen Li is trying to seduce the High God, intending to kill him? Shen Li smiled, feeling extremely absurd. "Goddess, regardless of whether I can be as capable as you expect, if Xingji doesn't have the ability to keep his godhood, it's his business. Tell me, what's the use of you telling me this?" After saying that, Shen Li turned her head and left, leaving Yulan alone with cold eyes. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 46. The immortal energy in the pond was lingering, but it was not a good place for Shen Li. When the strong immortal energy washed away her miasma, it also faded a lot of her demon energy. An hour's bath made Shen Li exhausted, like a big battle. If she wants to restore her magic power, she would have to wait until after the banquet. Shen Li smiled coldly. She understood that this was exactly the effect the immortals of the heavens wanted. It faded her magic power and reduced the threat. These morally respectable immortals are always on guard against the demons, guarding, even if they had already surrendered that way. A loud clam sound came from outside the mirror washing hall, and then the roar of the beast seemed to shatter the beams of the room. Shen Li raised an eyebrow in surprise. "There are monsters in the heavens too." She put on her clothes, tied her hair, and opened the door from the marrow hall with a kind of playful mentality. Above the huge auspicious color cloud in front of the hall, a huge white lion rushed towards Yulan frantically, and the attendant of the washing marrow hall stood in front of Yulan with a pale face, protecting her. However, the lion had already forced Yulan to the corner of the wall. Unavoidable, the attendant rolled on the spot, rolled under the lion's crotch, and fled in embarrassment. Only Yulan stood in the corner of the wall, trembling with pale lips, staring blankly at the white lion. The white lion roared, raised his claws, and attacked Yulan. Shen Li frowned. She fell in front of Yulan and raised her hands to block. The white lion's paws seemed to be less strong than the Shen Li arm that was blocking him. The lion froze, but although his move was blocked, Shen Li frowned. She felt that her breath was unstable, and she was unable to push the white lion away. She knew that it must be the merit of this marrow washing pond. When the white lion stalemate, Yulan behind her suddenly said, "I don't need the help of people of the demon race." Okay. When Shen Li heard this, she immediately loosened her hand, and the white lion claws greeted Yulan with murderous intent. Yulan didn't expect Shen Li would let go. Because of what she said, she immediately gasped in fright, her face was pale, and she froze in place when her claws were about to touch her cheeks. She only heard Shen Li say, "If want to keep your face, say please. If you want a favor, then ask for it appropriately." Yulan didn't dare to turn her head, the wild beast's rage made her cry of fear. Yolan's hand quietly caught Shen Li's clothes, and Yolan's voice was three-pointed fearful, three-pointed unwilling, "Please, please." Shen Li knew that Yulan was unwilling and bitter, but she was still satisfied. She smiled contentedly, sighed in a low voice, pushed away from the white lion's paw, and swept Yolan's thin waist with the other hand, jumped over the top of the white lion's head, and fell behind it. When Yulan opened her eyes, she was lying limp and sitting on the ground. Shen Li said, "Originally, if you didn't ask me, I didn't intend to save you, but you came to the marrow washing hall with me. It would be quite a coincidence if something happened here. I just don't want others to gossip anymore." Yulan, who had only escaped a catastrophe, couldn't bother with Shen Li's teasing. She only glanced behind Shen Li, her face turning pale. Shen Li glanced back and saw that the white lion had already swooped in front of the two of them, and was waving the huge claws at them. It was fine for Shen Li, she could run, but it would be a burden to carry Yulan. Shen Li looked at the white lion, she was too weak to fight it, but if she didn't, Yulan would die for sure. Without time to think about it, Shen Li hugged Yulan, protecting her, and received the furious claws in her back. Her flesh was lacerated and blood was spilled. Yulan was so frightened that she screamed. How often she had seen such a scene in her life. After one blow, the white lion's second claw was about to strike, and for a while, Shen Li hugged Yulan and rolled out of the way, escaping the white lion's attack range. Yulan's hand accidentally touched Shen Li's back, her hand stained with blood. Her lips trembled. Are you okay?" Shen Li didn't even wrinkle her brows, "It's just skin and flesh injuries." Seeing that the white lion wanted to pounce again, she knew that the white lion was actually staring at Yulan. Shen Li's eyebrows darkened. "Why, he's targeting you." Yulan stared blankly at the blood on her hand with a pale face and did not answer. Shen Li knew that she had just been in the marrow washing pool and she would not be able to fight against this white lion. She had fought monsters for many years and was very familiar with the temperament of beasts. When a beast realizes that it could not defeat the opponent, it will shrink back. This time, her purpose was not to kill the white lion but to force it back, as long as she won it in momentum. Yulan, who was sitting behind Shen Li, suddenly felt heat all over her body. She looked up at Shen Li in a daze. In the backlight, the profile of this woman's face was so handsome that she almost forgot her gender. Suddenly, there was a flash of red light in Shen Li's body, and the surrounding air moved frantically. Yulan seemed to suddenly hear a phoenix screaming, brightening the sky. The scorching breath of her whole body became heavier. The white lion on the opposite side roared fiercely, refusing to back down. Suddenly, it has become a battle between the two momenta. The immortals around them had already been pushed far away by the blowing air. Only Yulan behind Shen Li could clearly see that the bright red under Shen Li's eyes became more and more flooding until it dyed her entire eyes. There was another, extremely loud cry. Those hot waves of air seemed to condense into a dazzling phoenix in the air, whizzing towards the white lion, and the white lion, which had been roaring constantly, took a step back. The phoenix was on top of it, was hovering, as if ready to dive and bite it. The white lion dodged from side to side, and finally uttered a woo. His figure suddenly became smaller, and finally turned into a white hairball, curled up on the floor trembling. The murderous aura suddenly stopped. Shen Li took a step forward, but one hand grabbed her sleeve. She turned her head and listened to Yulan lowering her head and whispering. "Danger, danger. Don't go, wait for the heavenly generals to come. Look again." Shen Li raised her eyebrows. This goddess is suddenly behaving with such a gracious temper. She grabbed the goddess's hand and took her away. "It's okay." Shen Li turned to leave and didn't see Yulan looking up at her back and touching her hand again, her expression inexplicably complicated. Shen Li walked to the white hairball and leaned over to pick it up. The white long-haired dog opened his black eyes and looked at her watery, with a begging whimper in his throat. She shook it without pity. "Say, what kind of evildoer are you?" The long-haired dog trembled even harder. "Azure King. The king is merciful." The white-bearded old man rushed from a short distance until Shen Li was in front of him and bowed to her, saying, "This is the divine beast's calamity raised by the high god. It's not a monster. It's a kind of pet?" Shen Li threw the white dog to the old man with white beard that hugged him. "Are you gods becoming big farmers here in the heavens?" "Oh," listening to the king's tone, "it seems to complain that everything is my fault." A voice sounded from the side and the immortals around all saluted. When Xingji appeared, the old man with a white beard hurriedly put down the white dog/lion, leaned over and bowed. "Xiao Xian is guilty." Xingji helped the old man with hand. His eyes fell on Shen Li, and the light in his eyes moved. "Injured?" Shen Li folded his hands and bowed. "Thanks to the blessing of the gods, I only suffered a little skin injury." Xingji's fingertips moved. In the end, he still suppressed his emotions. He only bent over to pick up Midu, the white dog/lion's name, and touched its head. Midu's grieving rubbed against his palm, and he asked softly, "What happened?" The old man with white beard said. Xiao Xian obeyed the Lord's order to bring Midu from Tian Weishan, the house of the heavenly emperor, to Shiyuan, Xingji house. I don't know why, but Midu was suddenly mad when she got here. I couldn't hold it, and Midu ended up hurting the Azure King and Luotian goddess. It's really Xiao Xian's fault. Xingji glanced at Yulan from a distance, and was silent for a long time. It's not your fault for the sudden madness of Midu. You send the Azure King back to Shiyuan, and then find a physician to check on her. He turned around, walked up to Yulan, and lifted her up from the ground, and said, "You follow me." Yulan nodded with a pale face. When Shen Li returned to Shiyuan, she didn't wait for the physician. She really couldn't believe the people of the heavens, so she wrapped her wounds and changed her clothes. Seeing that the old man with a white beard had found a rope in the backyard to secure the dog, Shen Li stopped and said, "Don't trap him." The old man hesitated slightly, "But if it hurts the king again?" "This will not stop him if it turns mad again, so save it. Don't waste the rope." Moreover, Shen Li is not stupid. As a sacred beast, how could it go crazy for no reason? Seeing Xingji today wanting to talk privately with Yulan, Shen Li knew that Yulan herself must have caused this disaster. Thinking of this, Shen Li sighed a little. She had only come to the heavens for a few days, and she had been attacked by so many, intentionally or unintentionally. Seems that she is really incompatible with this place. The old man with a white beard thought for a while, but he didn't insist on using the rope. He muttered, "That's fine, if you like it, you can play with it." Originally, the gods were also looking for it to pass the time. After hearing this, Shen Li stiffened slightly, pushed the door of the room last, and returned to her room blankly. Shen Li sat in the room for a long time, wondering what he thought of himself now. She felt like that long-haired dog. For the high god, she was a fun way to pass the time. In the evening, someone knocked at the door twice, but when Shen Li went to open the door, no one was seen, only the hot food was placed at the door of the room. Shen Li was not worried and went back to eat her food. This person's craftsmanship hasn't degraded at all, but this kind of thing will inevitably give Shen Li a bit of emotion. She put the bowl away, and when she brought the bowl to the door, she suddenly saw Xingji walking out of a room opposite her. She knew that was not his room, but Shen Li often sees him coming out of there. The two met. Shen Li just nodded to Xingji, and closed the door without saying anything. "Is the food still to your taste?" he said in a low voice, then he cleared his throat, glanced at the closed door, and smiled in a way that could only be described as bitter. "Is the food still to my taste?" he said a little bit louder. "The wound isn't bothering you, right? If you are bored, you can play with Midu. It won't hurt you anymore." There are so many things to say, but he shouldn't say it, and the other party also didn't give him a chance to speak. It's so frustrating. So that's how it feels. At night, Shen Li couldn't sleep, and simply went out and walked in the yard. The moon in the celestial world is extremely round and bright, shining and illuminating the house in the night. Shen Li saw that there seemed to be a little bit of light overflowing from the opposite room. She knew that this was the room that Xingji often went to, and her heart suddenly became curious. Could there be any rare treasures in it? Shen Li glanced at the closed door of the Xingji room and walked quietly to the opposite room. She pushes the door and entered the room, carefully closing the door. Shen Li turned her head and saw a huge screen, which was different from the usual flowers, trees, mountains, and rivers. It was a dark blue night sky with stars dotted above. Like a sky curtain with the stars and rivers flow with the wind, it is actually a moving painting. Shen Li was amazed at it and felt that there was a strange treasure hidden in it. But when she went around the screen, she was shocked. This is not a normal room, but like another space opened up. There was no floor under her feet and no roof above her head. Shen Li seems to have walked into the painting on the screen just now. The sea of stars and clouds was an entirely different world. What surprised Shen Li the most was that there seemed to be small characters engraved on the bright stars. She squinted her eyes and looked even more shocked. Shen Guanyue, Shen Lu Xing, Shen Qing Yi. This is actually a shrine to the spirits of the ancient gods. It's best not to come in here. Xingji's voice was light, but he still frightened Shen Li. Gathering courage, she turned to look at him. Xingji smiled when he saw Shen Li's vivid expression. "Didn't I tell you before?" Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 47. Shen Li stared blankly at Xingji, analyzing this situation in her heart. The shrine of the ancient gods was an extremely important place, which was not easily accessible. It's just. Is it really okay to put casually such an important place in such a room? People in the heavens live so comfortably that they don't even know it. They don't even bother to set a barrier at the door. I think I should go, right? Although Shen Li is a demon and always disliked the style of the gods, she still has some respect for the ancient gods. Xing just smiled, too late. He looked up at the sky with flashing souls and said, "You being here isn't a problem. A long time ago people come to worship it, but now it's been a long time since someone has came to see them." Xingji said it was okay, so she didn't have to rush out. She looked up at the sky full of stars that seemed to be spiritual tablets, and gradually they formed a circle, enclosing Shen Li and Xing Ji as if was a group of people surrounding them. They looked the same, with a slight smile on the corners of their lips. This place is the same as the scenery of the outer sky. Before they're always lined up like stars, it is rare for them to move around, I guess. Seeing you today, as they've all come to watch the excitement, they are very happy. Shen Li glanced at him and saw that although the corners of his lips were just lightly bent, the rest of his face was showing joyful emotions, which was the same as her. The smile was very different, and Shen Li knew that Xing Ji was really happy at this time. She looked at the floating spiritual tablets and suddenly felt a little bit desolate in her heart. For Shen Li, all she saw were the words engraved on these spiritual tablets, while what he saw were his former friends who would never return. No one knows how many years he has lived until now. He is called an ancient god in the three realms. He enjoys the highest courtesy, lives alone in the sky, lying on the stars, watching the world's major events, but no one can accompany him anymore. He stands too high for anyone to touch. Do you feel lonely? Shen Li asked these words in a ghostly manner. Xing Ji turned his head to look at her. He was silent for a while, and then smiled. Why do you ask? I don't know what you think, but if the demons, my generals and subordinates all become silent stars, if I had to live alone in the demons' empty world, Shen Li paused, I would not survive. Xing Ji smiled. I had to be okay with it, the responsibility is on my body. Whether if it is loneliness or life or death, it's not under my control. Shen Li looked at him. Should God hold everything in the world in his palm? Here, based on the context, she means that Xing Ji have to carry this burden. In English sounded more like that he owns the word, but that doesn't suit the context. That's right. He stopped. I am the only one now. Even if life and death are beyond my control, unless I end my life, my power will stay in the mountains and rivers forever. Shen Li was stunned. Die? The gods can also die? Naturally, everything lives and dies, even gods cannot escape. Although I had a long life, but in the end, when that day comes, I will use the power of heaven and earth to merge with the world. A ray of vitality merges into the mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas. Although the gods are extinguished, their divine power will remain forever, and they will continue to guard all things and stars. Shen Li was taken aback. If this is the case, then these ancient gods turned into a ray of vitality in between heaven and earth? Xing Ji shook his head. 30% of the lifespan is exhausted. The remaining 70% are all changed even before they died, because they did things against the way of the heavens, so they were stripped of their godhood, forever reincarnating so they could feel the sufferings of the world. Their divine forms were destroyed, all their divine powers are gone, and all the magic techniques they left between the heavens and the earth will eventually disappear. He looked up. These spiritual tablets are here by the kindness of the heavens. They left thoughts for the remaining gods to remember and mourn. He watched the people around him leave one by one, and the increasing number of tablets. That is to say, the gods who have lived for the longest time in conformity with the heavens will still have their powers spread in the world, and the gods who have been deprived of their godhood by the heavens will leave nothing. Shen Li was dazed. Suddenly a terrible thought crossed her mind. If something happens to you now, and your godhood is taken away, then all your spells will disappear. Then the ruins where the monsters are. He stopped and nodded. The ruins are another space created by me. If I was robbed of the godhood without my power to sustain the spell, it would naturally disappear. Shen Li's face sank. Thousands of scorpion-tailed foxes. Will the monster beasts run out? No. The arc of Xing Ji's lips is slightly lighter. They will disappear together with the ruins, but at the same time, the demon world will be involved in and fall together. Shen Li was surprised. Why? Even if it is a god, it is extremely difficult to open up such a huge space. Xingji waved his hand, and a ray of light crossed his palm. I could create the ruins only by relying on the power of mountains and rivers and the space itself. Therefore, I use the power of the 5 elements of the demon realm to infuse the divine power to make the ruins. In the beginning, the demon realm and the ruined Su were connected together. Exist and coexist. Shen Li stared at Xingshi in disbelief, and said angrily, "You did such a thing regardless of the descendants of the demon's realm. The ruins are connected with the demon realm. If there is any turbulence in the ruins, wouldn't the demon realm be the first to suffer?" At that time, opening up another space was the fastest way to solve a monster chaos. His expression was cold, and even now, he did not regret it when it came to the decision of the year. If you didn't do that, it would all be gone now, even the demon's world. Shen Li gritted her teeth, knowing that in a battle, she would sometimes make sacrifices for a certain benefit. But this kind of sacrifice? You can't make any changes. Shen Li gritted her teeth, nothing at all, you must live to the end of your life. Xingji lowered his head and smiled, this is natural, you don't even need to mention. What's more, I am the only god in the outer sky today, and the entire outer sky is maintained by my divine power. If something happens to me, the outer sky will be overturned, and all the stars and rocks will fall on the 9-layer heavens, the heaven where they are right now. It will surely cause the collapse of the 9 heavens and endanger the people of the world. Xingji said lightly, but he pressed a heavier stone on Shen Li's heart. Thinking of what Yulan said to her, Shen Li lowered her eyebrows. She was right, she couldn't risk it. No one could bear the cost of losing him. It's not only his life that he is protecting, but all lives in the 3 realms, such a heavy responsibility. It's really hard to bear. So. Xingji spoke softly, his expression was extremely bland, but his emotions were surging and his eyes were reflected in the bright galaxy, and he said every word clearly. Shen Li, I can't like you. The warning in his words was so obvious, but she didn't know who exactly he was warning, Shen Li, or himself. Shen Li's heart twitched inexplicably, she turned her head. The god is joking, how can Shen Li dare to have any illusions about the god now? As long as the god stops teasing Shen Li from time to time. I can't control it. Xingji suddenly interrupted Shen Li's words, but he said with a smile knowing that he was being irresponsible, I can't help it, I want to tease you. This guy. Shen Li clenched her fists, the anger that surged upwards made her turn her head, stare straight at Xingji, her tone was cold, and she didn't even bother to use the honorific title. What do you mean? He said that he has a heavy responsibility and cannot be moved. He was the one pushing her away, and he was also the one bringing her closer. Shen Li couldn't bear it anymore, and couldn't bear it at this time. What's wrong with you? Xingji stopped and nodded, I was about to ask you, is there something wrong with me? Is this, he is admitting to it. Shen Li stared at Xingji, and she suddenly thought, is this really happening? All kinds of emotions flooded her heart, and she couldn't find any word to say. There was silence in the room for a while, and even the spiritual tablets flew back to their positions. Only then did Shen Li slowly react to the meaning of Xingji, and then suddenly realized that this person was really despicable. His words are so ambiguous, but the meaning behind them is so clear. The right thing would be not have any emotions at all. But he said he couldn't do it, then, Shen Li nodded suddenly, that's it. She took a deep breath, held the suffocation in her chest, stared at Xingji, and said, with a powerful voice, this king will stop giving this kind of trouble to High God. This is not something she can control alone, but what can be done? The person who takes the heavy responsibility of the entire world is already this shameless in front of her. The only solution is to let her do it. Azure King will not second-guess things anymore. Xingji smiled, Azure King Xingji looked sideways into Shen Li's dark pupils, filled with stars, making Xingji lost for a moment. He turned his head and blinked, just looking at you. I think it is necessary to treat the symptoms rather than the root cause. Shen Li sneered, Thin's king will definitely live up to High God's trust. She turned around to go, but she stopped suddenly when he called her out, King. Shen Li paused, waited for a while, and then Xingji said. There is still something I have to ask for. Before Shen Li could agree, he said. I don't know how long I have lived or when my life will expire, but if one day, my deity disappear and become the vitality of heaven and earth, leaving a spiritual tablet here, I hope that the king will visit and clean up in your free time. No matter how great her determination was, Shen Li couldn't help but turn back slightly at this time. Why me? Xingji smiled, because I want to see you. Because even if one day he dies, he still wants Shen Li to come and see him, so he can remember these feelings, and if she came to visit, maybe she will think of him too. If she forgets him, then he would be too lonely. Welcome to my channel. This is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 48. The Baihua banquet starts tomorrow. Shen Li didn't saw Xingji since that talk. Even under the same roof, it is extremely easy for two people with magical power to avoid each other. After that, Xingji still cooked food and delivered it to Shen Li's door, but she didn't eat any of it, so after 2 days, Xingji stopped delivering food. However, Shen Li couldn't let herself be hungry. Although she didn't like the immortals in the heavens, she still had to go out and walk around every day. On this day, she swayed to the venue for the banquet of hundreds of flowers and wanted to fill her hunger with a few fairy fruits. Unexpectedly, she just took a peach in her hand, and when she turned around, the goddess Luo Tian stood behind and stared at her. Shen Li let out a clear cough. The peaches of the heavens are quite big. Then she threw the peaches back. But Yulan said, this peach is not big, it is from a peach tree that has been fruiting for 100 years. It is not a rare thing. You can taste this peach, and then taste the next plate that has been fruited for 500 years. So you can make a judgment on what is better. Is this her way to say that I can eat the peaches? Shen Li blinked and looked at Yulan. Yulan turned away, her eyes showed some embarrassment. She walked over to Shen Li, picked up 3 peaches, took a pot of wine, stuffed it in Shen Li's arms, and walked quickly with her head lowered. Shen Li looked at the food in her arms, but still did not react. What does this goddess mean now? Want to choke her to death through these few fairy peaches? Maybe she is trying to frame her for stealing the fairy fruit? There was a little fairy servant who was busy by her side. Shen Li turned her head and asked, Isn't it considered stealing if I eat what your goddess gave me? The little fairy was taken aback. The Azure King is joking, since it was given by the goddess, naturally is not stealing. Shen Li raised an eyebrow and decisively took a peach and put it in her mouth. She went all the way back to Shiyuan drinking wine and eating peaches slowly, but Shen Li felt that something was wrong when she walked into the room. The celestial light was too bright. Once she fell on the bed, she couldn't open her eyes. Shen Li tugged the quilt and buried her face in it and muttered. I knew he was not at ease, waiting for me here. Shen Li didn't wake up until the bell at the Baihua banquet rang through the 9 heavens, and it took a full 99 and 81 times to wake Shen Li. She stretched her head under the quilt, and when she saw the sky outside, she woke up instantly. She came here on behalf of the demon world, and being late would be a big joke. She turned over and sat up, quickly tied her hair up, and opened the door. Xingji was no longer there, and he didn't even call her. Shen Li's heart was burning with evil fire, but she helplessly suppressed it. It was probably for the best. They couldn't even have the affection of roommates. As she walked to the front yard, Shen Li wanted to fly away, but suddenly a red light flashed across the sky. Shen Li frowned. At first, she thought it was a firework from the heavens, but she saw the red light getting closer and was actually coming straight towards the Shiyuan. Shen Li frowned again, still hesitating whether to stop it or not. She saw the red light suddenly accelerate to fall on the roof of the Shiyuan lobby. Only hearing a boom, the earth trembled, the Shiyuan lobby collapsed, and the hot flame spread instantly, burning an orange-red sky. Heaven was being attacked? This thought flashed in her mind. Shen Li raised her head and looked into the distance, only to see a fireball from an unknown source hit Shiyuan again, and one of the places where it fell was the wing where the spiritual tablets were placed. That first real smile that she saw coming from the corners of Xingji's lips crossed Shen Li's heart. The demon energy that was washed away in the marrow pool had not been completely recovered yet, but she barely hesitated, and her figure flashed on the roof of the side room. Shen Li snorted and barely pushed out a semicircular barrier to protect the house below. However, the power of the fireball was completely beyond her imagination. It was extremely hot and carrying huge pressure. If it weren't for Phoenix's natural fire, she might have been burned to ashes before she could catch the pressure. She heard a sound of ka-cha under her feet. It was a crisp sound of shattering tiles. She gritted her teeth, and the red light spread in her eyes. With a deep breath, her whole body's mana turned into a wave of golden light, and she rushed towards the fireball with overwhelming power. The fireball shattered from inside out, turning into dusty fire spots, scattering around her wings. Shen Li stood alone on the roof, the wound on her back open, dripping blood slowly from her hands. However, there was no time to rest. More fireballs kept coming. Shen Li's face was solemn, without avoiding or hesitating, with a fist clenched. The bottom of her eyes was determined not to shrink. After the 81 bell rang, the Emperor of Heaven leaned slightly and said to Xingji, "God is seated." In such a situation, even the Heavenly Emperor cannot sit in the highest position, but no one knew that Xingji hates to sit in this location. The white jade seat on the highest steps is too cold. Ah! Red light flashed across the sky. The eyes of the immortals followed it, and they smiled. "Which car is that? It looks really majestic and beautiful." But after the lights fell, there was a loud noise, and the sky was bright red. The clouds covered with fairy mist trembled, the cups and plates fell, and everything turned into a mess. The gong fairy couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice. However, after the panic, there was a terrible silence. At this time, no one in the comfortable heavens reacted to what happened. Xingji stood up and saw several fireballs chasing the previous red light in the distance. His eyebrows sank, and he felt flustered in his heart. "Report." The strong voice of the guard was particularly harsh at the silent Baihua banquet. He ran all the way through in a gorgeous and cumbersome armor and made a crisp ding-dong sound. But no one wanted to appreciate the voice of Jade. Only the guards shouted in panic, there is a fire attack. Going to Shiyuan." The immortals were shocked. The guard's voice was hoarse and trembling, "It's burning up." As soon as the breeze passed, no one saw when Xingji disappeared. When everyone came back to their senses, they thought, how could they let High God fight alone? After Heavenly Emperor regained his senses, he hurriedly recruited generals and hurriedly assigned the task. He personally led a team of people to Shiyuan quickly. Azure King went to a banquet on behalf of the demon realm, but she never arrived. She should be in Shiyuan. If she was attacked in Heaven's realm, it will not be easy to explain to the demon's realm. Moreover, Shiyuan also enshrines the spiritual tablets of the ancient gods. The anxious emperor knew that those spiritual positions were extremely important to High God and none of them could be lost. If the guard were not enough to stop the attack and the god becomes angry, it will be very bad. The fireballs smashed down the house one by one, and the roof tiles under Shen Li's feet all shattered. She cursed the idiots in the heavens more than once in her heart. Even in such an important place, they didn't think of putting a defensive enchantment. And she had been defending the place for a while now. Where did everyone go? With such a high-profile attack, fireballs crossing the sky, and no one stopped the attacker? The idlers' gods really have lived a long time comfortably, and their brains are too slow. If the devil realm wants to attack the heaven realm in the future, Shen Li feels that in only one day she could make this group of wine and rice bags bow their heads. Another fireball fell. This force was a bit heavier than before. Shen Li heard the roof beams creaking under her feet. Obviously, this wing room could not be supported for long, and these attacks were endless. Shen Li gritted her teeth, her heart felt very aggrieved. She has always been good at offensive and defensive and likes to fight quickly. Today, being on the defensive for so long would be better for her to be cut by the enemy directly. The wound on her back kept cracking, the blood had soaked her clothes, and the loss of too much mana gradually made Shen Li a little unable to hold it, as if her body was hollowed out. One by one, fireballs hit her. Sustaining the protective enchantment, in addition to her injuries, and the huge pressure made her fall on her knees, and the burning flames were even more troublesome. Without magic power, fragments of fireballs pierced into the already thin enchantment of Shen Li and burned her cheeks. A red mark was left on her cheeks, but Shen Li was always indifferent to skin trauma. The only thing she feared was that sparks would burn her eyes. As soon as she thought about it, a spark rushed towards her pupils. Shen Li closed her eyes subconsciously and bowed her head to hide. However, at this moment of trance, another fireball was able to hit the place where Shen Li was standing. The huge impact caused the soles of Shen Li's feet to soften, and one knee fell on the beam of the room fiercely. With a click, the beam broke off, and a piece of the roof was sunken in the place where Shen Li was kneeling. Suffering from this sudden blow, the unstable aura in Shen Li's body was even more chaotic, and the blood kept surging. Even if she was trying desperately to suppress it, there was still blood overflowing from the corner of her mouth. However, at this critical time, she didn't know if it was an illusion or what, but she felt a cool air burst out from the broken beams of the house, wrapping around her body, alleviating the burning pain. But Shen Li didn't have the mind to feel the coolness. She just felt that it was the first time in her life that she had not even seen the enemy and was forced into such a situation. It was really embarrassing. She was angry, and when she raised her head, she saw a fireball that was bigger than before coming quickly in her direction. The word bad flashed across her mind, but before anything could happen, she suddenly felt a severe cold all over her body, and the huge pressure was instantly removed. White clothes appeared in front of her eyes, and Shen Li, who was kneeling on one knee, saw only one back, standing against the light. Because Xing was going to attend the 100 Flowers banquet, the buns on his head were more neat than usual, but he still looked lazy, and the hot wind blew his clothes and long hair, making him look cool. His figure blocked all the heat and pressure. Shen Li covered her chest with one hand and felt that her heart that had just been beating rapidly due to the battle was at this time comforted and eased. This figure could bring so much security. For Azure King, a sense of security was a rare thing to experience. The heat wave was approaching, and the huge fireball was carrying a force that seemed to turn everything into ashes, surging forward. Xingji's face was calm, only gently probing his hand. The fireball stopped the attack suddenly like a vicious dog that was tied with a leash around his neck. It had reached the limit of the rope and could no longer move forward. Go! Xingji shouted and waved his sleeves. But that wasn't really necessary, Shen Li thought, because she saw that the huge fireball was easily thrown back. Thrown back. Shen Li could understand why heaven didn't allow gods to be sentimental. With such a powerful force, if they could do what they want and use this power for selfish reasons, then wouldn't the world be in chaos? The side where the fireball flew back was lighted with a blazing fire, and as expected, no fireball struck again. Thinking of the other parties running from his life, Shen Li only felt funny, but when her heart loosened, her body became more tired, and she lost too much blood to control her body. She leaned back and rolled down from the dilapidated roof. However, before she fell to the ground, someone picked her up, and unexpectedly, the person who grabbed her didn't only grab her hand, instead, he held her entire body. The warm palms were pressed against her already soaked back, and the wounds on her cheeks were gently stroked with cold hands. Xingji's face was magnified before her eyes, and even though Shen Li was so exhausted at this time that she couldn't see anything else, Xingji's eyes Shen Li could still understand. He was angry. He was saying, "Shen Li, don't you want to live anymore? I'm not going to die." She heard her vague voice, "I'm just a little tired." For this house, to force yourself to be like this, he seemed to try his best to endure his emotions. "You are, how careless." "I couldn't." Shen Li's eyes were about to close and her tired muscles couldn't support her head anymore. She slammed her head forward, her forehead pressed against Xingji's shoulder, her voice was small and fuzzy. "I couldn't let you lose this." Xingji's eyes shone and a warm smile spread on his lips when he saw those spiritual tablets. Shen Li just glanced at him, but deeply remembered it, and could never forget it. Xingji clenched his fists as if he was struggling for a long time. He wrapped Shen Li's with a quilt with one hand, and firmly pressed the back of her head with the other, pressing her into his arms. The strength was sometimes tight and sometimes loose. He couldn't control himself. It turns out that there is such a person. In front of her, he couldn't even grasp the strength to hold her. A finger touched her hair lightly, his lips were just next to Shen Li's ears, his eyes drooped, his expression low, 3 points helpless and 7 points bitter. He only said to Shen Li, "Azure King, are you really trying to help me control myself?" The emperor finally led the guards and hurried over. Except for the wing room that Shen Li was desperately protecting, everything else was burnt to ashes. Xingji held the Shen Li in front of a pile of broken walls and tiles. With his back facing everyone, no one could see the expression on his face. The Emperor of Heaven was slightly startled. "God Xingji. Don't come." Xingji said lightly, "I'm helping Azure King heal." He said, "No one is allowed to come over." As expected, no one dared to step forward. Xingji held Shen Li in front of everyone and embraced Azure King, who still had the same heroic appearance as usual, but then everyone saw that, compared with Xingji, Shen Li was so petite, after all. Azure King was also a woman, it was not surprising at all that she looked like one. Welcome to my channel, this is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 49. The Emperor ordered a thorough investigation of the attack on the heavens. However, 3 days later, the fireball thrown back by Xingji was found in the northern corner of the heavens where it made a mess. There was not a single living person. The gods set up camp in there and let soldiers look for clues. After searching for so long, their inefficiency has made all the wise immortals worry. What was more worrying was that the people who attacked the heavens this time weren't the demons and not even monsters, but the nature of the attack seemed to be from the Beihai. Beihai means north of the sea, clan who has been living in the deep sea of the north. They always were an extremely meek and peaceful race. They have never provoked war for thousands of years, but this time they attacked the heavens like crazy. If they dare to do this in the heavens, what unbearable things have they done in the lower realms? The heavenly emperor was furious and immediately went to Beihai to find out. However, before he could go, the demon realm handed over an urgent letter dated 5 days ago. The content of the letter made the emperor pale. Shi Yuan collapsed, so Shen Li had to move back to Fu Rongjun's mansion, this time to prevent someone from taking advantage of her serious injury. Fu Rong personally added an enchantment to the room where Shen Li lived, and Xingji moved into Jun Fu's mansion without hesitation. 2 distinguished guests stayed at his home, so Fu Rongjun couldn't do anything outrageous in the mansion anymore, and he was very unhappy in his heart. On this day, he called his acquaintance Xian Jun to play with him, and the other party laughed at him. The rumor is that when this Azure King was injured, the High God was furious. He even hugged her. It seems that the two of them have a very close relationship. If you marry her in the future, your life won't be easy. Jun Fu Rong heard this, and his face paled. He swept the chess piece, stomped his feet, and said angrily, "You really are using this to ridicule me. I called you so I can forget all of this." The other party just laughed, and suddenly they heard messy and fast footsteps. They looked around and saw Yukin walking into the yard with her face ugly. When she saw Fu Rong, she said coldly, "Where is the Azure King?" Fu Rong was startled, and rubbed his forehead in distress. "Let me tell you, Sister Huang, it's better if you don't add to the chaos right now. That person is now protected by the High God. How can we do anything? You stop and go back." Yolan's eyes were cold while she stared at Jun Fu Rong. She just asked again, "Where is the Azure King?" Only then did Fu Rong realize that something was wrong, but he still hesitated a little. In the backyard wing, in order to heal her injuries, I set up a barrier for her. Take me there." Then without waiting for Fu Rong, she hurried forward. But after taking 2 steps, she saw that Fu Rong wasn't following, so she turned her head and stared at him fiercely. Fu Rong trembled with fright and hurriedly walked forward to lead Yulan. He asked as they walked, "What's the matter?" Yulan ignored him, and when she walked to the door of the small courtyard, Jun Fu Rong suddenly paused. "I will open the barrier, so you can go in, but you have to go alone." "I will not go. I am afraid to see the High God." Yulan stepped into the yard without hesitation. The barrier was closed behind her. This time it seemed that Fu Rong had spent some time thinking about Shen Li's healing place. The winding path was quiet, and the trail was full of fragrant vegetation. Separated from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. Yulan walked faster, but stopped when she was about to walk out of the fragrant woods because she faintly saw Xingji and Shen Li standing at the door through the shadow of the tree. Shen Li's expression was unhappy. The two of them were arguing. "Why do you need to spend so much time caring about one skin injury? It's a waste of time." Xingji stood inside the door, his hands blocking the door, his expression indifferent, and Shen Li's anxiety became more and more clear. "Let me out. You can't go out until the injury is healed." Xingji said it lightly. "The injury is healed. Those fireballs are not as powerful as imagined. If it weren't for the spiritual energy in the room overflowing and my friends protecting your body with divine power, do you think you could speak so loudly today?" Shen Li was taken aback and suddenly remembered that at that time, she felt that her whole body was cooled a lot. It turned out that the power of the spiritual tablets leaked out to protect her. Shen Li felt that those ancient gods were really amazing. This was extremely kind of them. Even if there was only a memorial tablet left, they still took the time to protect her. Shen Li continued, "So, High God will help Shen Li say my thanks when I go to worship next time. Also, you said so yourself, since I was protected, the injury isn't all that, and it's almost healed now. Let me go out soon." "No way." Shen Li was furious, and asked every word, "Why are you doing this to me? What are you planning to do, that you need to go out so much? Shen Li smiled. 5 days have passed, but the heavenly realm has not caught the mastermind. Even if the person who was investigating the news only set off the day before yesterday, they should be able to run from the heavens to Beihai in 2 days. It wouldn't take dozens of days to go back and forth, they probably were lost or already died by now. Shen sneered, what efficiency. Xingji just smiled. Those who should be in a hurry are not in a hurry, but you, the one who has to heal, wants to go there to catch them. I'm almost blinded by being locked up here. Shen Li gritted her teeth and muttered to herself, if it was in the past, I would definitely shoot out the nest of those bastards. You were beaten by someone and feel unwilling to lose. You want to get it back at them. Xingji smiled and exposed her. Shen Li didn't want to look at him. Because of her anger, her mouth puffed subconsciously, but the arc was extremely small. If you didn't look closely, you wouldn't be able to detect it. But as she moved, Xingji could see her slightly bulging cheeks. The uneven skin tone was the traces of her previous burns. Thinking about her falling in his arms that day, Xing almost subconsciously pressed lightly that piece of skin with his thumb and rubbed it twice. I will avenge you. He spoke softly. When she heard his slightly kind voice, Shen Li was stunned for a moment. She looked up at Xingji and then pushed away his hand with a slap. She stared at him solemnly, her eyes cold and wise. There were 3 red fingerprints on Xingji's wrist. He looked at Shen Li for a while, then dropped his hand, letting his wide sleeves cover the mark. He smiled, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. High God. Yulan suddenly spoke and walked out of the fragrant woods. She bowed. God, Azure King. The two looked at Yulan. Before they had time to ask, Yulan said anxiously. Lord, the Heavenly Emperor invites you to the Lingxiao Palace. There are important things to discuss. Shen Li frowned when she heard the seriousness in Yulan's words. Lead the way. Xingji raised his eyebrows slightly. Why didn't the Heavenly Emperor just send a letter? Yulan said in a low voice, High God, it is really important. He stopped asking and nodded, so, let's go together. In the Lingxiao Hall, the civil servants and generals of the celestial realm were separated on 2 sides. The Emperor of Heaven was sitting on the dragon chair with a serious face. Seeing Xingji and Shen Li coming together, his brows wrinkled slightly, making people look at the first seat on the left. He opened his mouth and said, Azure King, here is a letter from the demon realm, please take a look. The attendant presented the letter to Shen Li, and Shen Li took it and only glanced, her face turned pale. Severely, when did the news come? It came 5 days ago. The Emperor sighed a little. The attack caused the immortals to be busy and neglected this letter. No one showed to me until today. Shen Li's expression became colder. She said, Emperor, what happened? The capital of the demon realm was also attacked by the Beihai clan. The demon lord was in a coma. A dozen demon generals died, and it happened everywhere. The situation is extremely critical. Shen Li's brows tightened every time the Emperor said a word. This is the battle report of 5 days ago, and now the situation must be even worse. Shen Li has a lot to say about the efficiency of the celestial realm, but at this time any complaints to allies are useless. The more critical the situation, the calmer she has to stay to analyze the situation. Shen Li closed her eyes, cleared the emotions in her heart, and said coldly after a moment. In this way, the attack on the heavens 5 days ago was a feint. It was the method of the other party to attack the West. If they really wanted to attack the heavens, how could there be only such a spot for launching fireballs, and how could they hit a secluded place like Shiyuan? The other part was just using a trick to get everyone in heaven tired of running up and down, so there would be no time to take care of other things. Heaven couldn't help the demon realm, so the other side's main troops attacked the demon realm. The demon lord was in a coma, and a dozen generals died. Such heavy casualties, the demon realm shouldn't have suffered so much. The demon's realm is different from the celestial realm, Shen Li is very clear on that. Those generals are all elites. Shen Li begs the emperor to allow her to return to the demon world right now. This is natural. The emperor waved his hand, and someone else presented a few boxes full of pills. The demon lord is in a coma because he was injured badly. Azure King, take these boxes of pills back to the demon world and give them to the demon lord. If someone fires up soldiers against the demon realm again, you will be able to help the demon realm to suppress the thieves in a short time. Thanks for the emperor's kindness. Shen Li took the pill without delay, turned, and left. Seeing Shen Li's figure disappearing at the entrance of the High Heaven Palace, Xingji's eyebrows moved slightly, and he suddenly heard the emperor calling by his side, "High God, what do you think about this? It isn't a coincidence that the demon's world was attacked. I believe that this should be a power struggle, and the Beihai clan may also be a borrowed cover." The emperor nodded, "The High God and I have the same thought. The demon realm has been submissive to the heaven realm for many years, there are many dissatisfied people among them, and some people are bound to make trouble. If they want to overthrow the current regime of the demon realm, to establish a new king, and if the new king is opposed to the heavens, this would be very troublesome." The civil and military officials were a little noisy for a while, and they were all talking softly with the people around them. The emperor turned his head and looked at Xingji. "High God have been exhausted recently, and the 100 Flowers banquet has not been successful. I am really incapable." Usually, Xingji would say a polite sentence, but today he didn't say a word. It looks like he agreed with the emperor's words, and said silently, "You are incompetent." The emperor stayed silently, and all the 100 officials, too. Finally, the emperor coughed twice and said with a little embarrassment, "The High God has been away from the outer sky for a long time, and the outer sky is the source of the world's fresh air. These days, the heavens are slightly chaotic, and the evil spirit is a little bit heavy. High God, I will return to the outer sky tomorrow." Xingji faintly said a sentence and walked away. There was a moment of silence in the Lingxiao palace, and the heavenly emperor said, "After this incident, many shortcomings of the heavens have been exposed, and everyone saw it. After all, it is comfortable to live for a long time. Such a small matter was enough to make heaven fall into chaos. Once again, dear immortals, what should be investigated and cleaned up, it's time to reorganize it." All of them agreed. Shen Li walked to the southern heavenly gate, not knowing what to think of all of this. She turned her head inexplicably and suddenly saw Xingji standing 10 feet away behind her, staring at her calmly. Shen Li clasped her fists and bowed deeply. "Thank you, High God, for taking care of me these days." Shen Li says goodbye. Xingji's mouth moved, lowered his head with a smile, and whispered softly, "I can control it now." Hearing that, she turned her head without any attachment, and her long, bundled hair drew a neat arc in the air. She jumped down and walked past the southern gate. Many days from now she would still think about this moment constantly. Why he didn't call her up that day, why he let her go so easily, he obviously still had something to say. Welcome to my channel, this is the audiobook, Accompanying the Phoenix. Chapter 50. At the moment she stepped into the demon realm, Shen Li felt that the air was 3 times worse than in the past, even more filthy. It was different from the usual miasma. Now there was killing and violent intent permeating the air everywhere, Even the people in the capital were anxious. Shen Li walked from the central avenue of the capital to the demon's lord palace with a calm face. The broken houses along the way told of the panic the demon realm suffered that day, and the white banners hung messy and deserted by the roadside. This place isn't the demon's capital she knows, but more like a ghost of the former city. In front of the palace gate, the guard had a white cloth strip on his head. The expression on his face was not like the usual calmness, but a bit of strong majesty. The guard on the left side saw someone rushing towards the palace gate, and didn't recognize Shen Li. He only raised the spear in his hand and yelled, "Stand, stop." Shen Li frowned and said with a slightly harsh expression, "Why are you so flustered?" The two guards were stunned. After seeing that the person was Shen Li, one of the guards twitched his mouth. Shen Li didn't know whether he was crying or laughing. "The king, the Lord is back." His legs seemed soft. He knelt on the ground and squatted both heads fiercely. "Azure King is back. The king is back." Another guard stared at Shen Li silently and wiped his tears. Shen Li clenched her fists. "What is this behavior? Crying on the job?" Her voice was majestic. "No matter what happened, as a soldier of this king you shouldn't cry on duty. Don't let this king see someone who is crying and shaking the morale of the army. Cut it off now." The two guards kowtowed. Shen Li calmed down a bit. "Where is the demon lord?" "Back to the king. The demon lord is resting in the dormitory now." "Hasn't he woken up yet?" "Not yet." Shen Li only felt that her heart was burning. The demon lord was powerful and very good at strategy, not to mention that there was always Yan Qi-rong to protect him. It is usually extremely difficult to hurt him. This injury was so severe. Shen Li rushed to the demon lord's sleeping hall. Before she got close, she saw the maidservants coming back and forth from the sleeping hall. The water basin in their hands fell and stained the ground bright red. Could it be that the demon lord injury has worsened? Shen Li became more anxious and rushed straight into the hall. People kept greeting Shen Li. They were officials of the demon realm. However, Shen Li didn't have the intention to respond to them. She went around the screen and went inside as soon as she lifted the curtain. The medical officer at the door could not persuade her. The demon lord's robes on the bed were not changed, and a little blood dripped from the neck. A medical officer pressed a clean cloth on his neck. However, the cloth soon became wet, and the maidservant had to take it to wash it. And then replaced with a clean one. The bloodstains on his clothes were dry. The mask on his face was not taken off, only the lower jaw was removed, and his lips were exposed to make it convenient for the servants to feed him medicine. The color of his lips revealed that his body situation was terrible. His lips were blue. Shen Li took out the pills there were in her arms and said loudly, "Here are a few boxes of elixir, given by the Heavenly Emperor. Physicians, please come to see if there are any that can be used now." As soon as she said this, regardless of etiquette, the doctor on the side quickly took the pills off Shen Li's hand, poured them out one by one, and carefully identified them, and then took one of them and put them in the mouth of the demon lord. In a moment, the blue color on his lips faded slightly, and the blood on his neck slowly stopped. "This pill is useful. This pill is useful." The medical officers were ecstatic, and someone rushed to Shen Li to worship. Azure King really is the savior of the demon world. Forget the flattery, the demon lord is hurt to this extent. What's going on? The physicians looked at each other, and after a while an old physician replied, "Master, the demon lord suffered only a sword wound on the neck. This wound was not critical, it just hurt the flesh. The thing that caused the devil to be unconscious is poison." Shen Li frowned. "What kind of poison?" It seems to be a kind based on miasma. This poison can make people lose their minds, and then the person who was poisoned will fall into a coma. If there is a wound on the body, the wound will not heal, and the bleeding will not stop. But this kind of miasma is slightly different from the other miasma. It seems to be very harmful to the body of the demon, but it will not cause great damage to other things. This is like a poison made to go against the demons. Miasma poison. Shen Li couldn't help but think of the poison that Fu Xing used when she was in Yangzhou City, but at that time the poison was not that powerful, and the miasma was dispersed with a little mana. Now this poison has something to do with the poison at the time. Shen Li guarded on the demon lord's side for a while. After eating the pill again, the blue color on the demon's lips faded away, and a pale white slowly emerged. Shen Li could imagine how pale this face must be under the mask. She looked at him quietly for a while. Her fists could not help clenching. Where are Qing Yan and Qi Rong? The guard on the side replied, the two envoys didn't show up in this campaign. Shen Li's complexion darkened. What a coincidence, it was almost as calculated. She was silent for a while and asked, those generals. Where are the generals who died? They are still lying down in a military camp outside the city. It may take a few days to be buried. Why? The guard's voice was extremely low. According to military regulations, after the war, the soldiers must be buried before the generals can be buried. Shen Li turned her head to look at him blankly. 5 days have passed, but the soldiers haven't been buried yet? The guard lowered his head and said nothing. Shen Li's head was empty for a moment. She stood up and took a slow breath, closed her eyes, and calmed her emotions. Keep the demon lord safe, and be sure to wake up the demon lord as soon as possible. After saying this, she left the demon lord's bedroom. She drove the clouds from the demon lord's palace straight to the military camp outside the city. Before she even got close, she could feel a deep and decadent smell in the wind blowing from there. The closer she gets, the more she could hear people crying. Some were hoarse, some were stern. It was unbearable to hear. Shen Li flew over this area very quickly and fell into the barracks. The soldiers were busy. No one saw her. Shen Li dragged a soldier and asked, where are the generals? The soldier's eyes were dull. Looking up at Shen Li for a while, the light slowly came into his eyeballs. Master, he called out in disbelief and blinked, then saw that Shen Li was still there. He was so excited that he held Shen Li's shoulders for a while. The king, Azure King, he shouted with flushed face, the king is back. The king is back. Everyone stopped working and looked there. Everyone was overjoyed to see Shen Li standing there. However, listening to their cheers, Shen Li's heart became even more serious. The demon world is not a mess of loose sand without rules. These soldiers should not behave as if she was their savior. They should be orderly and act according to the expected plan no matter what happens, and usually, that's what they do. If things were normal, even if they lose one battle, would be impossible to see them like this. It seems that the situation is more serious than imagined. Shen Li was thinking. Suddenly seeing two generals hurriedly walking in front of her, Shen Li immediately greeted them. General Dao Mu, General Shifeng, she just said hello, but she barely had time to speak when the two knelt in front of her with a puff sound. This general is incompetent. This general is guilty. Their foreheads slammed to the ground with great strength. Their faces showed extremely unwilling anger and irreparable regret. General, Shen Li's face moved. No matter how much she told herself to be calm and composure at this time, she couldn't help but be moved by the bows of these two veterans. How big a blow is it to make the proud soldiers of the demon realm so depressed? She stretched out her hand to support the two generals. Let this king understand what happened to the demon realm first. The two veterans got up slowly. They led Shen Li to the back of the barracks and explained, 5 days ago, a team of men and horses suddenly attacked from the south. After only opening his mouth, Dao Mu's expression was already anxious. Shen Li felt it was strange, and Shifeng finally took the conversation and said, the opponent only has 200 men and horses. Shen Li was startled and couldn't believe it. How many? 200 people. Shen Li suddenly understood why the soldiers were so upset. The Capital Guard army had a little more than 100,000, and the total number of generals must be more than 200. So many soldiers were trampled by a mere 200 people. What's the other party's background? Shen Li's voice was muted, and she had to say that even if she had not experienced the fight, she would inevitably be bothered when she heard this number. The soldiers carried the flag of the Beihai clan. Those soldiers were big men without armor, shirtless, and no weapons. They only fought with people with their bare hands, broke their necks, or beat them to death. What's more, they just tore people with great power. Shifeng's voice did not fluctuate, but even if he said these words so plainly, he still looked startled. Their skin seemed very different from ordinary people. It was difficult for ordinary soldiers to injure them even with swords or guns. Only the generals who have a little Taoist cultivation level could still hurt one or two by pouring mana on the blade. Can I see their bodies? The two generals looked at each other. No, at the end we decapitated at least 30 or so enemies, but their corpses were taken back by the opponent. Only 8 or 9 enemies were captured by the Demon King. They were fried into the mud. Shen Li pondered for a moment. The descriptions of the two generals made her involuntarily think of the 3 sturdy men she met in the city wall of Yangzhou when she and Xingji were investigating the matter of the gods who were kidnapped. If those 200 people who attacked the demon realm were really like them, their strength should not be underestimated. Thinking of the mysterious Fu Xing, Shen Li asked, do they have a leader? It's a very young man. He looks no different from ordinary people, but his swordsmanship was weird. He was injured by the sword. Fu Xing's figure immediately appeared in Shen Li's mind. It makes sense to think about it this way. Those big guys are his subordinates, and the miasma was his thing, but how could he belong to the Beihai clan? Previously he was in the human world trying to kidnap the mountain gods, and now the attacks on both heaven and demons real. Shen Li whispered, by attacking the demon's world, what he is trying to do. The general heard her muttering to herself, his fists clenched, and he said, the demon lord's golden seal was taken away by him. The golden seal, a symbol of the power of the demon world. Thinking of the riots happening all over the demon realm at the same time, Shen Li's eyebrows sank. Is it really to seize power? But what kind of power can be seized just by taking a gold seal? Shen Li was thinking and walked to the hall where the generals' bodies were lying. Her face was stern as she stepped in. There were a lot of generals inside, and everyone let Shen Li pass. A row of coffins, dozens of corpses. The people lying here, Shen Li could remember all their names, but now she could no longer recognize their faces. Some of them are incomplete, some are totally unrecognizable. Shen Li stops in front of a coffin. Live, there was only a sword and some broken pieces of armor in the coffin, and the bloodstains on it seemed to see people. Who is this? She asked softly. It's General Mo Fong. The general behind her replied, he was on the battlefield, desperately fighting with 3 enemies, and finally he was surrounded by several of them, and he was devoured by one of them. Mo Fong was swallowed by the opponent. Swallowed?